Evil doesn't always announce itself. It is instead silent and insidious like a predator, waiting for an innocent soul to invite it inside so it can devour. When a young boy unwittingly stumbles upon a relic of darkness, he opens a doorway to terror that will haunt him for years. His life will become a battle for his very soul. Will he survive, or will he be consumed by the darkness he's unleashed? This is the true account of John Drenner Jr.'s terrifying battle with a demonic force. The case is known as The Devil Inside Me. This video is a documentary-style chronicle of real events, told through those who lived them. It is a story of innocence corrupted by an ancient evil, of a family's fight for survival, and of a young man's journey through fear, torment, and ultimately, well, you'll see. Prepare yourself for a descent into a living nightmare, one you might not want to face alone or in the dark. Please make sure to like, hype, share, and subscribe. All those things help me out tremendously. Thank you. To tell this very interesting and complex case, let us first start at the beginning. Our story begins in Odenton, Maryland, a place famous for several things. It is home to the headquarters for the National Security Agency, or NSA, and home to the Army's Fort Meade. It is also known for having many forests that one can explore. This was particularly ideal for a young boy named John Drenner Jr. In 2003, a 12-year-old John, along with his 14-year-old sister Cheryl, were exploring the woods behind their grandmother's house one summer day. Cheryl, who seemed more gung-ho so to speak, was leading the way, while John trailed behind her, not wanting to seemingly get left in the dust. The two were known for being extremely close, with Cheryl clearly being the leader, whilst John was the follower. We loved going on nature hunts, looking for animals, and things like that together. We liked to explore, Cheryl would say in later interviews. While the two trailblazed, little did they know that something lay undiscovered before them, something that perhaps was better left buried. After nearly an hour of wandering, the two noticed unnatural shapes emerging through the foliage ahead. They began to see what appeared to be weathered wooden planks and a rusted tin roof. It was indeed a shack, hunched and forgotten among the pines and oaks. Vines curled up its walls, and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly as it swayed in the faint breeze. Butterflies danced uneasily in both John and Cheryl's stomachs. Together, they began sensing an odd silence surrounding them. There were no birds singing or insects buzzing. The woods had gone dead quiet. Cheryl didn't want to venture any deeper, but John, being an adventurous boy, decided that he wanted to see just what could be inside the old building's doors. As he neared closer to the threshold, fear began to well up inside him. But, pushing it down and deciding to be brave, John pushed the door open and stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under his weight. Dim light seeped through cracks in the walls, barely enough to see. As his eyes adjusted, he realized that the shack was littered with strange remnants of something. In one corner, a circle of melted wax and blackened candles. In another, animal bones, eerily arranged into a crude symbol. The air smelled of soot and something foul, like burnt hair or rotten eggs. John's heart thumped. He knew immediately that something was very wrong here. This wasn't a fun hideout or a forgotten clubhouse. It felt like he had stepped into a den of darkness. Still, he was a curious kid, and against his better instincts, he crept further in, drawn toward a crude wooden table at the center of the shack. On it lay an old-looking book, thick, with a cracked leather cover and yellowed pages. Dust swirled in the air as he picked it up. The cover had strange markings etched into the leather. They were symbols that John didn't recognize. The very touch of the book made the hairs on his arms stand straight up on end. He gently opened the book. Inside, the pages were filled with spidery handwritten text and unsettling diagrams. Inverted pentagrams, sketches of goat-headed figures, lists of what appeared to be rituals and incantations in a language that John wasn't familiar with. But despite this, he understood enough to realize that this was some kind of ritual book. With this realization, a deep chill ran through him despite the warm, musty summer air that surrounded him. John's hands trembled. He suddenly felt as if he were being watched. From outside the shack, a twig snapped. John was startled by this and nearly dropped the book. The silence of the woods had given way to a gathering chorus of whispers. At first, it seemed like the wind in the trees, but no wind was blowing by this time. They began to grow louder, circling him, saying words he couldn't quite make out. The fear that he had stuffed down earlier bubbled to the surface, and he slammed the book shut. It was at that moment that a shadow flickered at the edge of his vision. He spun towards the doorway, but nothing was there. John's instincts finally screamed at him to run, so clutching the old book tightly, he bolted out of the shack into the daylight. Upon exiting back into the dense woods, with the sun beginning to near the horizon, he realized that his sister was nowhere to be seen. She must have gotten spooked and headed back home, he thought. Then, suddenly, from behind him, he hears a low growl. John then ran as fast as he could through the brambles and trees. As his legs carried him, the forest seemed alive with noises now. The whispers seemed to be within mere inches of his ears. There was rustling in the brush on either side of him, twigs snapping just out of sight, as if something unseen was chasing him like a rabid dog and nipping at his heels. Panicking, John stumbled over roots and nearly fell. He could hear his own heartbeat thudding, and under it, that insidious whispering voice growing louder and clearer. It sounded like words in a foreign language, spoken just inches from his ear in a rasping hiss. John slapped at the empty air beside him, as though swatting away an invisible pest, and forced himself to run even faster. At last, the tree line broke, and he burst into the backyard of his grandmother's property. The whispers ceased abruptly upon his exit, like a radio being switched off. In the golden afternoon light, everything looked normal again. The old tire swing hanging from the oak, the distant hum of a lawnmower in a neighbor's yard. Gasping for breath, John leaned over, bracing his hands on his knees. The leather book dangled from his grip. He felt a trickle of something warm on his upper lip and wiped it with the back of his hand. It was blood. A thin nosebleed had started to drip. He stood there shaking, with blood spotting the grass at his feet. He didn't understand what had just happened. Did I imagine it? He wondered. The oppressive silence of the shack, the foul smell, those whispers that seemed to follow him. Surely it was just his mind playing tricks on him, after reading that creepy book. Perhaps he had spooked himself. He was just a kid after all. Still, a sense of dread hung over him as he tucked the mysterious book under his arm and hurried toward the house. He wasn't about to tell Grandma what he had found. He feared he might get into trouble for snooping, or worse, scare her with talk of devil worshippers in her woods. Maybe, he thought, he'd just hide the book somewhere and forget that this ever happened. Maybe it was nothing. However, John could not have been more wrong. In the quiet shadows of the trees at the edge of the yard, something watched him. He had taken more than an old book from that shack. That evening, the summer sun dipped low over Odenton as dusk settled in. Inside his grandmother's cozy home, John tried to go about the normal routines of a weekend visit. Dinner at the table with Grandma and his older sister Cheryl, watching a little TV before bed. He had stashed the leather-bound ritual book in his duffel bag, intending to examine it later when alone. But all through dinner, he felt distracted. He couldn't shake the sensation that lingered from the woods, like a pair of eyes still peering over his shoulder. Cheryl noticed her little brother's nervousness. "John, are you okay? You've hardly touched your food," she said, whilst furrowing her brow. John managed a weak smile. "I'm fine. Just tired from exploring outside today," he replied. He wasn't about to tell her what he had found. Cheryl was 14 and fiercely protective of him. If he mentioned the shack or the book, she would drag him straight to Grandma, and that would be the end of it. No more adventures, maybe no more weekends in the woods at all. So he pretended everything was normal, and eventually everyone retired for the night. But that night was anything but normal. John lay in the guest bedroom he shared with his sister when they stayed over. Cheryl was asleep in the twin bed across the room from him. Moonlight cast a faint glow through the sheer curtains, striping the floor with pale light and shadow. John couldn't sleep. His mind kept drifting back to that book. It was tucked under his bed now. He almost felt like he could sense it down there, radiating some kind of weird energy. Maybe I should never have taken it, he thought. He resolved that tomorrow he would throw the book away or put it back where he had found it. With that decision easing his conscience slightly, John finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Sometime after midnight, Cheryl was woken by a soft sound, a muffled voice. Disoriented, she blinked in the darkness. The sound was coming from John's bed. At first she thought he was talking in his sleep, but the tone was rhythmic, repetitive, almost like he was chanting. She sat up groggy. "John?" she whispered. There was no response. The low chanting continued. Cheryl squinted through the dark until her eyes adjusted. John was sitting upright in bed. The sheets had slipped off his torso, and he was facing the wall with his back to her and his shoulders oddly rigid. His voice, if it was his voice, was issuing forth in a low, monotone incantation. The words were utterly foreign to her ears, some strange language that she had never heard before. It didn't sound like the playful gibberish of a child or a bad dream. It sounded deliberate, ritualistic. The hair on Cheryl's neck stood up. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, heart beginning to pound. "John, wake up," she hissed a little louder. And still, he droned on, oblivious to her. Cheryl approached slowly. In the slivers of moonlight, she could now see her brother's profile. His eyes were open, glassy, and unseeing, staring at the blank wall. His lips moved, forming those uncanny syllables in a steady rhythm. It was as if he were reciting a prayer in some ancient tongue, or a curse. Cheryl's mouth went dry. Something was extremely wrong. She reached out and touched John's shoulder lightly. "John, wake up," she said, shaking him. Suddenly, John's chanting stopped. He fell silent and slowly turned his head toward Cheryl. In the gloom, his eyes met hers, but it was like he wasn't really there. For an instant, Cheryl felt as though she were looking at someone or something else wearing her brother's face. Then, John's body tensed, and he let out a gasp, as if realizing he couldn't breathe. Blood began trickling from his nose in a thin stream. Alarmed, Cheryl grabbed a tissue from the nightstand and pressed it to John's nostrils. "John," she whispered urgently. He blinked hard, and the spell, whatever it was, seemed to break. His eyes suddenly regained focus, and he recoiled, looking around in confusion. "Cheryl, what's happening?" John mumbled, still in a daze. He felt the wetness on his upper lip and touched it, seeing blood on his fingers. "You were sleep-talking or something, chanting in some weird language," Cheryl said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You wouldn't wake up, and then your nose started bleeding." John's heart lurched. He remembered the whispers in the woods, the voice he couldn't understand. Had he been speaking those words? He wiped his nose, embarrassed and frightened. I don't know. I was having a bad dream, I guess," he lied. In truth, he couldn't recall any dream. The last thing he remembered was falling asleep thinking about the book. And now this. Cheryl helped tilt his head back slightly to stop the bleeding. "We should get Grandma," she said. "No," John snapped, more forcefully than intended. "I mean, I'm okay. It's just a nosebleed. Please don't wake her up. She'll worry." John hated making his grandmother worry, and truthfully, he was terrified of explaining what might have caused this. He still wasn't sure himself. Cheryl hesitated, but she relented. She fetched a cold washcloth, and soon the bleeding subsided. John insisted that he felt fine, though he was shaken to his core. Eventually, Cheryl returned to her bed, casting concerned glances from across the room. "If you start doing that again, I'm waking her," she warned softly. John nodded, clutching the washcloth like a lifeline. Sleep did not come easily for either of them that night. John lay awake, body rigid, ears straining for any hint of a whisper or movement within the darkness. He felt humiliated that his sister had seen him like that, but also he was terrified. "What is happening to me?" he wondered over and over again. He didn't dare retrieve the book now. It sat under his bed like a poisonous thing. Did it somehow cause this? Or had something from the shack followed him and taken hold of him when he let down his guard? The long night had finally gave way to a pale dawn. John was exhausted, eyes red-rimmed and burning. At breakfast, Grandma clucked over his tired appearance and the tissue he held to his nose, which had bled a little again in the early morning hours. Cheryl had kept her promise not to alarm Grandma during the night, but she insisted on telling her now. John, she said, was talking in his sleep and had a bad nosebleed. It scared me. I've never seen him do that before. The grandma's face grew concerned. A deeply religious woman, she immediately sensed something was off. Perhaps it was just a nightmare, she said carefully, eyeing John. But I'll call your parents and let them know. And tonight, we'll put a blessed crucifix in your room, just for peace of mind. John didn't protest. In fact, the idea gave him comfort. A crucifix, a symbol of protection. Maybe that would help chase away whatever darkness he felt creeping at the edges of his world. He still hadn't confessed about the book or the shack. Fear and guilt gnawed at him, but he remained silent. He spent the rest of the day in a numb haze, helping Grandma with chores, avoiding Cheryl's probing looks. The leather book stayed hidden in his bag. He resolved to rid himself of it at the first opportunity. True to her word, that evening Grandma produced a small wooden crucifix that had hung in her own bedroom. She gave it to John to keep by his bedside. She also quietly murmured prayers as she sprinkled holy water around the guest room, lingering at the windows and corners, asking for God's protection over her grandchildren. John watched her, feeling a swell of gratitude and a pinch of shame. He still hadn't told her why such measures might be necessary. He wasn't even sure himself if they were, but part of him still hoped that this was all just a bizarre coincidence or a fleeting scare that would fade away. That night, John held the crucifix in his hand as he lay in bed. Cheryl was already asleep, seemingly at ease after Grandma's blessings. For a while, John stared at the cross's form in the dim light, tracing it with his thumb. He whispered a shaky prayer of his own. Please, whoever's listening, keep me safe. Don't let anything bad happen. Eventually, sheer fatigue overtook him, and he finally slept. No chanting disturbed the darkness this time. The household remained quiet until morning. When John awoke, he felt groggy but relieved. Perhaps Grandma's protections had done the trick. The terrifying episode seemed to have passed, but little did he know, the true horror was only just beginning. A week later, John and Cheryl returned to their family home in Pasadena, Maryland. Summer break was winding down, and soon they'd be back to school. John was almost relieved to leave Grandma's house and the strange events of that weekend behind him. He had disposed of the ritual book, tossing it into a dumpster behind a gas station on the drive home. As the garbage bin swallowed the leather-bound tome, John imagined he was throwing away whatever bad luck or evil that had clung to him. He tried to convince himself it was over. The Drinners' home was a modest suburban split level, filled with the normal bustle of family life. John's parents noticed he was a bit withdrawn after summer vacation, but they attributed this to the looming school year or normal adolescent moodiness. Cheryl occasionally studied her brother warily. She hadn't forgotten what she had witnessed. But since then, John seemed okay. Maybe, she thought, it truly had just been a freak nightmare. But as the days passed, John began to sense a familiar dread creeping back, especially after sunset. It started with small things. At night, as he lay in his own bedroom, he sometimes heard faint scratching sounds, like nails dragging lightly across his bedroom wall or along the floor under his bed. The first time it happened, John froze, holding his breath. He peered into the darkness, the hairs on his arms prickling. The sound stopped when he had turned on his lamp, revealing nothing but his posters and furniture. He tried to shrug it off as mice in the walls or the house settling. Then there were the whispers, On a few occasions, just as John was on the edge of sleep, he heard a voice murmur right next to his ear. The words were too soft and quick to understand, but the tone was malicious and mocking. Each time he would be jolted awake, his heart hammering, only to find his room empty and silent. These incidents left him trembling and drenched in sweat. He started keeping a flashlight and a Bible, which was a gift from his mother, on his nightstand, hoping that they might ward off whatever was happening. Within a month, however, the situation escalated. The demonic torment that had begun in Odenton had followed John to Pasadena, and it was seemingly growing bolder. Almost every night, John was jolted awake at 3 a.m., the so-called witching hour, by something. Sometimes it was just the bed itself shuddering, as if someone had kicked it violently. Other times, he'd awaken to find his blankets yanked off him and flung onto the floor. Once, he woke up paralyzed, unable to move or scream, as a dark, shadowy figure loomed in the corner of his room, watching him with glowing, faint, red eyes. That night, he squeezed his eyes shut, silently praying until the paralysis lifted, and the shadow, whatever it was gone. In the daylight, John tried to rationalize these occurrences. Perhaps he was having intense nightmares or episodes of sleep paralysis. He knew such things were scientifically documented, but deep down, he felt a cold certainty. Whatever this thing was, he considered it to be evil. That same presence he'd felt in the shack, the whispers in the woods, had latched onto him, and they weren't going away. In fact, this thing seemed to only be gaining in strength. For a long time, John didn't tell his parents the full extent of what was happening. He was afraid of sounding crazy. How could he explain that an invisible force was tormenting him? He worried they'd send him to a psychiatrist, or worse, not believe him at all. Instead, he confided a little more in Cheryl. She'd already seen him chanting in a trance once, so she took his concerns more seriously. Some nights, when John was too afraid to sleep alone, Cheryl would let him sleep on the floor of her room. One of those times, John woke up screaming as 3 long scratch marks appeared on his back, burning as if freshly carved by claws. Cheryl turned on the lights to find her brother curled on the rug, sobbing in pain. His shirt was ripped, and 3 red gashes were across his skin. There had been no one else in the room at all. In the morning, their parents demanded to know what had happened. John, through tears, finally spilled a part of the truth. "Something is hurting me at night," he cried. He showed them the scratches, which looked like an animal's work. Perhaps, grasping for a logical explanation, his father theorized that it could have been John scratching himself during a nightmare, or perhaps a prank by a classmate that got out of hand earlier, though the latter made little sense. John's mother was horrified and would take him to a pediatrician. They would only say that the marks were consistent with scratches and offered an antibacterial cream. The family even checked the house for a wild animal or a stray cat that might have snuck in, but found nothing. That incident deeply frightened John's parents. They started praying with John before bed, something they admittedly hadn't been doing regularly. They also placed a small nightlight in his room, thinking that it might ease his fears. John appreciated their concern, but he knew a nightlight wasn't going to stop what lurked in the dark. Night after night, John was worn down further. The demon increased its harassment methodically. Loud bangs would echo through his bedroom as if something was pounding on the walls from inside them. His bed would sometimes jolt in the middle of the night, as if kicked by an invisible mule. Once, the lamp on his desk slid off and shattered while he was doing homework, sending shards flying. John knew that he hadn't touched it, and another time, he awoke to the horrifying sensation of invisible hands gripping his ankles and yanking him halfway off the bed before letting him go. He would land on the floor, bruised and terrified. There were also episodes when foul odors would suddenly fill his room. The suffocating stench of sulfur and decay that would vanish after just a few minutes, leaving him gagging. And always those hateful whispers slithering into his ears when he was alone. Now he could understand what they were saying.
John, we see you. John, you're ours.
Exhaustion took its toll. At school, John struggled to stay awake in class. Dark circles carved themselves under his eyes. Teachers noticed and asked if things were all right at home. He nodded and lied that he was studying hard or not sleeping well due to teenage insomnia. His friends drifted away as he became more withdrawn and jumpy. However, there were a few moments of respite. The presence, somehow, seemed mostly confined to nighttime, but John could never fully relax. Even in the daylight, he always felt it watching and waiting. The psychological strain was immense. John lived in a state of constant dread. He started fearing nightfall entirely. Even as evening came, he'd pace his room, double-check the closet and under his bed, arms trembling as he tried to brace himself for whatever the demon would do next. He often prayed fervently, clutching a rosary Grandma had given him, begging God or any force of good to protect him. Sometimes it helped momentarily. There were nights he'd say prayers aloud, and the room would remain still for a while. But inevitably, the disturbances would start up again later in the night, almost as if the entity was enraged by his prayers. One autumn evening, about a year into his torment, John experienced one of the first direct encounters that left him truly shaken to his core. By this point, he was 13, and the demonic presence had worn him thin. He found himself extremely depressed as he became more and more isolated. The night of this particular encounter, he had fallen asleep at last out of pure fatigue. He was suddenly startled awake. The room was frigid, far colder than normal. His breath fogged in the air. Instantly, John knew that it was here with him. He reached for his bedside cross, but to his surprise, he couldn't move his arms. He couldn't move at all. He was completely paralyzed, lying on his back. All he seemed to be able to do was move his eyes. In the corner of the ceiling, he heard a soft, chittering sound, like claws skittering across plaster. Fear surged within him. He sensed something gather at the foot of his bed, though he couldn't turn his head. His eyes strained downward. In the darkness, a shape coalesced. It was darker than the shadows, a hunched, black silhouette, slowly rising before him. John's mind screamed, but his body remained rigid. The figure moved alongside of his bed. He could feel weight shifting the mattress as it crawled up, inching closer and closer. When it reached his face, John's whole body erupted in goosebumps. He felt hot, rancid breath waft over his cheek. The creature was right beside him, yet he could still only make out an anamorphous darkness. Suddenly, in a guttural whisper, it spoke his name.
John.
The voice sounded like many voices layered together as it slithered through the air. With tremendous effort, John managed a whimper. This thing, this demon, laughed, a horrible cackling sound. Then, as abruptly as the episode had began, the pressure holding him down released. John immediately sat upright, gasping and sobbing. The room was now empty, yet it lingered with the odor of sulfur and rot, indicating to him that something unholy had been there just moments before. On his nightstand, the crucifix lay toppled, as if knocked over by an unseen hand. That was the first time the entity had addressed him by name and in the flesh. It left John shaking uncontrollably, unable to sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, he was sick with dread and exhaustion. His mother kept him home from school that day, thinking that he had the flu, as he was pale and vomiting from stress. John didn't correct her. How could he explain the sickness he felt? How could he explain that it was stemming from pure terror? Over the next several years, the demonic harassment continued relentlessly. It became the horrific background of John's life. By the time he was 16, he had experienced countless inexplicable phenomena. Objects flying off shelves, doors slamming shut on their own, disembodied growls in his ear at random times. His family struggled to understand and cope. They did bring in a local pastor to bless the house once, but aside from a temporary calm that very night, nothing really changed. The entity had remained. If anything, it grew more furious. Sometimes it even tormented other members of the family. A whisper here, a shadow sighting there, but it focused the brunt of its malice on John. He was the target. He had been marked. Yet, John survived each night, somehow. He learned to live with the terror as a grotesque normal. By age 18, he was finishing high school and aching to move out, hoping desperately that maybe distance would weaken the demon's hold. He had grown used to the attacks, as strange as that sounds. The fear was still there, but he had built a scarred shell around it. What he hadn't realized, though, was that the demon had no intention of letting him go so easily. It would follow him. It would never stop, as it promised, until he was dead. One humid summer night, everything reached a horrific crescendo. Earlier that day, John had dared to feel a glimmer of hope. He and a couple of his friends had gone to the beach, and for a short while under the sun, he'd almost felt like a normal teenager again. Laughing, joking, forgetting the darkness that waited for him at home. That evening, he even managed a genuine smile at dinner with his parents and sister. For once, he thought maybe things were quieting down. It had been about a week since anything major had happened, and maybe, just maybe, the entity was losing interest or power. He couldn't have been more mistaken. That night, as John drifted off in his bedroom, his mind replayed happy memories of the beach. But the darkness had been waiting for exactly such a moment of lowered guard. John awoke to a sudden crack of thunder. Being shaken out of a sound sleep, he jolted upright, as if his heart had leapt into his throat. Quickly turning on his lamp, his eyes frantically screened the room. Heavy rain then began assaulting the roof and pelting his windows. As he tried to calm down, a flash of lightning illuminated the rest of his room for just a moment. Albeit unnerving, he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. However, before he could ponder further, assuming he had just been startled by the storm outside, the lamp in his room flickered and then turned off. He tried flicking it on and off, but the power seemed to be out. John now sat in near total darkness, except for sporadic flashes of lightning casting warped shadows on the walls. Finally, he was able to fumble for and find his flashlight in his nightstand. As he clicked it on, the beam cut a shaky circle through the room. He slid out of bed, intending to go to the door and open it, maybe call out to see if his family was all right. But as soon as his bare feet touched the floorboards, a wave of static electricity hung in the air. John felt the hair on his arms rise up, as it had many times in the past, and alongside this, the return of a sickening feeling in the pit of his stomach. Simultaneously, his flashlight flickered, as if it was dying. Confused, knowing he had just replaced the batteries in it mere days ago, he attempted to turn it on and off. While he was preoccupied, there was a lightning strike that lit the room in a blinding white flash, quickly followed by an accompanying crack of thunder that shook the house once again. In that split second, John saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure was standing in the doorway, directly in front of the closed door. Tall and humanoid, but grotesquely wrong. Its skin was black, seeming to glisten with a leathery texture. The thing had a vaguely human shape, but its proportions were off. Its limbs were too long, its posture hunched and predatory. Worst of all was its face. When the lightning flashed, John saw an empty darkness where the eyes should have been, hollow sockets, and below them, a wide grin of jagged, rotten teeth. In that brief illumination, the creature's head seemed to tilt towards him, and John could swear it was smiling. He screamed and dropped the flashlight, and the room plunged back into darkness. In the feeble light of the next flicker, the figure was gone from the door. John's pulse pounded in his ears. Had he really seen it? Was his mind playing tricks? He had never before seen the demon so clearly with his own eyes. If it was real, oh God. Summoning courage born of sheer panic, John snatched the flashlight off the floor and shone it frantically around. The beam danced across his desk, his closet, the empty corner, but no sign of the black figure. Breathing hard, he took a step towards the door. And the moment he did, a sound came from directly behind him. A low, guttural growl. He then felt hot breath hit the back of his neck. Something was right behind him. John froze. A crackling current of adrenaline and terror spiked his nervous system. He didn't want to turn around, but some primal instinct made him whip his body to confront whatever this thing was. Standing nose to nose with John was the demon. It had moved impossibly silently to within mere inches of him. In the flashlight's quivering glow, John got a clear look at this nightmare-made flesh. The demon's skin was indeed black, appearing charred and slick. Its form was masculine, but twisted. as if agony was etched into every sinew. It had no visible eyes, just deep sunken pits, oozing shadow. Its mouth hung open in that horrible grin, revealing gnarled teeth like broken glass. It was so close that John could feel its breath now on his face. The scent, putrid and hot, smelling of decay. John's mind went blank with terror. He thought he might faint on the spot. Somehow, he managed to croak out a single question, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you?" The demon's chest vibrated with a chilling laugh that didn't sound entirely audible. It resonated inside of John's head. Then it spoke, and its voice was a legion of voices, almost as if multiple people and animals were intertwined in a dreadful harmony. "We are legion," it rasped, each word crackling with ancient malice. "You belong to us." In that instant, John felt a violation deeper than any physical wound. A sudden blackness swarmed his vision. The last thing he remembered was a powerful blow. He felt himself hit the floor hard, and then nothing but the void after. John lost consciousness, and when he finally woke, it was morning. Weak sunlight peeked through the curtains. He found himself sprawled on the living room floor downstairs. How he got there, he had no idea. His entire body ached, as if he had been beaten. And slowly, memories of the previous night began to trickle back. The storm, the figure, that face, and that voice. John's stomach churned with fear and disgust at the recollection. For a moment, he hoped that it was just some kind of hellish nightmare. But as he sat up, pain lanced through him. He looked down to discover that his shirt was torn and stained with blood. With trembling hands, John lifted the fabric. His torso and arms were covered in fresh scratches and bite marks. Angry, red gashes crisscrossing his skin, and oval bruises ringed with deep indentations of bite wounds. He let out a strangled sob. This was no dream. The demon had manifested, physically attacked him, and declared its claim on him. "You belong to us," it had said. The words echoed in his mind, filling him with further despair. It was a miracle that John's parents hadn't found him first. They were still asleep upstairs and unaware of the struggle that had happened under their roof. John got to his feet, wincing. He felt violated and utterly alone. He limped to the nearest mirror in the hallway and saw how haggard he looked. His face was drawn, his eyes haunted. There was dried blood at the corner of his mouth. He cleaned himself up as best as he could, not wanting to alarm his family, and pulled on a fresh long-sleeved shirt to hide his injuries. In a daze, he returned to his bedroom. The door was wide open, though he remembered it slamming shut. And aside from the shattered lamp and fallen crucifix, everything looked disturbingly ordinary. The storm had passed. Sunlight made the space seem almost normal. It felt like an insult, given the nightmare that had unfolded mere hours ago. Sinking into his bed and shaking uncontrollably, he thought to himself, never before had the demon shown itself so completely. His fragile bulwark of denial crumpled. This was no mere haunting, no trick of the mind. A literal demon was after him, and by calling itself Legion, it suggested that perhaps there were many demons, or at least one powerful one that aligned with the demonic horde spoken of in the Bible. The weight of the realization was crushing. How could anyone fight such a thing? When his family woke and went about their mourning, John stayed quiet about the details of what had happened. He only mentioned that he had fell and broke his lamp and got a little scratched up. His parents eyed the marks on his neck and the way he winced moving, and they knew that he wasn't telling the full truth. But by now they were out of their depth. They had tried doctors. They had tried prayer. What more could they do? His father just muttered that maybe they could see a specialist. His mother gently suggested therapy once more, and John agreed to whatever they wanted, but inside, he felt hollow. After that night, something in John changed. Fear curdled into resignation. He truly believed what the demon had told him, that he belonged to it, that it wouldn't stop until he was dead. Waking up bloodied on the floor became a new morbid normal. Whenever a particularly vicious attack happened, John would simply clean himself up, hide the evidence, and endure the day. What else could he do? No one could protect him. And every night the demon came. Sometimes it was minor, scratches or just a whisper. Other times it was brutal. A bite on his leg, or even the sensation of being choked by invisible hands until he nearly blacked out. By the time he was 19, John felt more like a ghost than a living person. The demon had stolen his adolescence, leaving a shell of a young man. He graduated high school, barely, with grades far lower than his early potential, and found a low-paying job to keep himself occupied. He rarely smiled. He seldom prayed anymore. It seemed pointless. In fact, he felt a deep anger at God for allowing this to happen. He stopped going to church with his family, finding no solace there. If God cared, why would he let a child suffer years of demonic torture? John's faith was in tatters, and that left him spiritually vulnerable. Perhaps that's exactly what the demon wanted. To numb his constant anxiety and pain, John began to self-medicate. It started with alcohol. A few beers at a party made him feel, for a short time, less afraid. Drunk, he could almost forget the demon waiting for him in the dark. Soon, he was drinking nightly. When alcohol wasn't enough to blot out the terror, he turned to pills. Vicodin stolen from an old bottle in the medicine cabinet after his dad's surgery. The opiates gave a blissful apathy. He could sink into a stupor and not care if something scratched or whispered to him at night. He'd wake with new bruises and barely react. It was a dangerous path. John knew it deep down, but by that point, he didn't much care if he lived or died. Dying might even be a relief, he thought bitterly. Suicidal thoughts had long since become frequent companions. Twice he had tried to end it. The first time he had swallowed a mixture of painkillers and sleeping pills with a bottle of whiskey. He truly intended not to wake up. But wake up he did. Hours later, he'd be puking violently on his bedroom floor, with his head feeling like it was going to explode. It was as if his body rejected the escape. Or perhaps, he wondered grimly, the demon kept him alive to continue its torment, not allowing him the easy way out. The second attempt was more direct. One night after a vicious attack that left 4 deep scratches across his chest, John sat on the bedroom floor and held a razor blade to his wrist. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered. He pressed the blade into his skin, drawing a thin line of blood. At that very moment, the bathroom light flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. In the black mirror, he thought he saw a pair of red eyes glaring behind him. A familiar whisper swirled around his head.
Do it. You'll never escape us.
John snapped. He hurled the razor away and screamed, a raw, primal scream that echoed in the tiny bathroom. He slammed his fist into the floor tiles, sobbing. Whether it was the demon goading him or his own tortured psyche, he realized that he was teetering on the edge of oblivion, and the demon was eager to push him over. If I die, he thought, it wins. Even in his despair, a spark of defiance glimmered. He didn't want the demon to have the satisfaction of destroying him completely. Not yet. He bandaged his wrist, stumbling back to bed in the dark. That night, he didn't sleep at all. He just laid there with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, with tears drying on his cheeks. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he later admitted, I felt worthless as a person. I felt like I had nothing. And yet fate had not abandoned John Drenner Jr. Unknown to him, events were aligning to bring a glimmer of hope into his darkness. The catalyst for that hope would be love, and a fierce desire to protect someone other than himself. At 19, John's life took a small upward turn. He fell in love. He met Mary, a kind and lively young woman, at the hardware store where he worked. Mary was drawn to John's quiet, gentle demeanor. She sensed he carried deep wounds, but didn't pry. She simply offered him genuine friendship and eventually affection. For John, Mary was a ray of light piercing the gloom. Around her, he felt almost normal. She made him laugh again, something he thought he had forgotten how to do. John was terrified of dragging Mary into his nightmare, so he kept his dark secret from her initially. When she asked about the faint scars on his arms or the tiredness in his eyes, he deflected with half-truths, saying that he had had a sleep disorder or a rough childhood. Mary, not wanting to pressure him, accepted these explanations, though she was worried about him. Within a year, their relationship blossomed. Mary became a source of strength for John. He found himself looking forward to spending time with her, and for the first time in ages, he imagined a future, perhaps even a happy one, if he could just rid himself of this demon somehow. His love for Mary rekindled a will to fight that had nearly been extinguished. In quiet moments, he dared to pray again, not for himself, but for Mary's safety and happiness. Eventually, they decided to move in together. Mary had a small rental house not far from John's parents, and it seemed like a perfect fresh start. John hoped privately that maybe leaving his family's home, where so many traumatic events had occurred, might weaken the demon's hold on him. Perhaps the entity was tied to that place. It was a feeble hope, but he clung to it. The first few nights after John moved into Mary's house were peaceful. John still lay awake for hours, tense and waiting for the familiar disturbances. But none came. For an entire blessed week, John experienced quiet, uninterrupted sleep at Mary's side. He began to believe that he might have escaped the demon at last. Mary noticed his improved mood and was delighted. She had no idea why John's nightmares, as he called them, had apparently stopped, but she was relieved for him. The reprieve did not last, however. Evil is patient, and it had followed John to his new home. It was simply lulling him into a false sense of security before delivering its next cruel blow. One warm summer night, Mary was awakened by a strange sensation. The bed was vibrating. At first she thought it might be an earthquake tremor, but nothing else in the room was rattling. She then realized that John was shaking. He had been the source of the movement. He lay beside her, eyes shut, but his body was shaking uncontrollably, as if having a seizure. "John," Mary whispered urgently, sitting up. She gently shook him, and his eyes flew open, wild and panicked. He sucked in a huge gasp of air, as if he had been drowning. Then he stared at Mary with an expression of pure terror. "It was here," he panted. "In the dream, Mary's blood ran cold. "Who was here, John? What happened?" John pressed a hand to his forehead. He was drenched in sweat. "I saw a woman," he stammered. "A horrific old woman. She was in our room. She crawled onto the bed and into me. I think I was dreaming, but it felt so real." His voice broke. "She was choking me from the inside." Mary's eyes widened in alarm. She didn't fully understand, but she could see John was deeply frightened. So she embraced him, rubbing his back, and told him, "It's okay. It was just a nightmare." John nodded shakily, clinging to her. He didn't tell Mary that he recognized the crone-like woman from his dream as just another form of the demon. It often tricked him with disguises in his nightmares. This time, an old witch-like hag, but it was the same entity, it was sure. And the way it felt, crawling into him, it was possessing him in the dream. He hadn't experienced that before. It terrified him much more than any scratch or bite could. Mary eventually calmed him and they went back to an uneasy sleep. But the demon was done hiding. The next evening, as the couple ate dinner together, Mary's bookshelf suddenly toppled over without warning, crashing to the floor. Books and ornaments scattered. Startled, Mary assumed it was an accident. Maybe it was off balance. But John's face went pale. He recognized it as a warning. He helped Mary clean it up, all while his heart was pounding and full of dread. Later that night, Mary experienced her first directly inexplicable occurrence. She had gone into the bathroom to brush her teeth while John was locking up the house. As she stood at the sink, something flickered in her peripheral vision. She looked up at the mirror and screamed. In the reflection, standing directly behind her, was a towering dark figure with hollow eyes and a predatory grin. Mary spun around, but nothing was there. The bathroom was empty, yet the image had been unmistakable. John burst into the bathroom to find Mary backed against the counter, trembling. "Mary, what happened?" he demanded, though he could guess. Mary's voice shook. "I thought I saw someone behind me in the mirror." She clutched at John's arm. It looked horrible. John's heart sank. There was no point in denying it now. The demon had revealed itself to Mary. This meant now that she was part of its game and potentially in danger. He felt a surge of guilt and fear. He had hoped to spare her from this horror, but this entity was not going to allow that. That night, John finally confessed everything to Mary. They sat on the couch, and in halting words, he recounted the whole ordeal since he was a child. The shack in the woods, the chanting, the nightly torments, scratches, and attacks. The demonic apparition calling itself Legion. Mary listened, with her eyes wide and brimming with tears. She understood the full scope of trauma that John had been living with. It was almost too fantastical to believe. Yet what she saw in the mirror and John's absolute conviction left no doubt that something supernatural and evil was at work. "Oh, John," Mary whispered, holding his hand tightly. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? You've been carrying this alone for far too long." "I didn't want to scare you or think I was crazy," he said. "I thought maybe I could handle it or it would go away. And for a moment I thought it had, once I had moved here. But I was wrong. It followed me and now it's showing itself to you. I'm so sorry, Mary. I never wanted you to be involved in this." Mary wiped her tears, trying to be strong. "We'll deal with this together," she said, though her voice trembled. "You're not alone anymore." Her resolve bolstered John, and for the first time he had an ally who fully believed him and was in it with him. That night, however, the demon escalated its campaign, as if enraged by Mary's involvement. In the darkest hour of the early morning, around 3 a.m., they were jolted awake by a loud bang in the kitchen. They rushed out of the bedroom to find all of the cabinet doors flung open and all of their dishes tossed to the floor. Many of them were broken. The whole house vibrated with a palpable anger. Mary yelped as she felt something scratch her leg. There were 3 shallow cuts that seemed to appear out of nowhere on her calf. John quickly pulled her behind him, furious and terrified. He shouted into the empty air, "Leave her alone. It's me you want, not her," his voice echoed. There was no answer, but an oppressive presence pressed down on them, and Mary clutched his arm, shaking. They barely slept the rest of that night, jumping at every creak. But come morning, Mary had made the decision. She said, "John, we need help. We can't go on like this." John, exhausted and desperate, agreed. He had reached the end of his rope. The demon's bold attack on Mary was the last straw. If he didn't find help, he feared it would truly kill them both. But who to turn to? They had seemingly tried everything. The local pastor's blessings hadn't worked in the past. They needed someone experienced in spiritual warfare, someone who understood demonic oppression firsthand. That afternoon, Mary got in touch with a friend of her family who was active in a nearby church. Through a chain of referrals, they were given the name of a man who might be able to help: Bill Bean, a spiritual deliverance minister known in Maryland for confronting dark entities. Bill had a reputation from local media. He had even been featured on TV for his work. Supposedly, he had battled demons before and won. John was hesitant at first. After years of feeling abandoned by God, he wasn't sure that a churchman could do anything. But Mary insisted that they at least try. "What have we got to lose?" she said, placing a hand on his cheek. "At the very least, you'll have someone who believes you and has seen this kind of thing." Looking into Mary's hopeful eyes, John realized that he owed it to her and to himself to try everything to rid their lives of this evil. If he did nothing, Mary could end up seriously hurt, or worse. He couldn't allow that. So with a shaky sense of resolve, John agreed. Mary made the call, and Bill Bean himself answered. The moment Mary mentioned the situation, Bill's tone grew serious. He said he could meet them the next day at a small prayer chapel in nearby Hanover, which was Bill's base of operations. John's stomach fluttered with nerves when Mary relayed this. Could this finally be the end of his nightmare? He hardly dared to hope, but for Mary's sake, he mustered some optimism. That night, the demon made one more brazen attempt to cow them. John awoke around 2 a.m. to find Mary missing from the bed. Panicked, He jumped up and ran through the house, calling her name. He found her in the hallway, standing rigid and facing the wall. Her eyes were closed, and she was whispering something under her breath rapidly. John's blood turned to ice. Mary was chanting, just as he had done as a child. He rushed to her and gently shook her shoulders, asking her to wake up. She kept whispering the strange words, and her voice was not her own. There was a deeper timbre beneath her natural tone. It was as if something else was speaking through her. John's heart pounded. Was the demon possessing her? He shouted her name again, and this time she jolted awake. She looked around in confusion and then at John. "What happened?" she asked, realizing that she was in the hallway and clutching her head. I think I was dreaming. I dreamed that someone was calling me out of the bed." John held her tightly. "I think it's trying to use you, Mary. It knows that we're going for help. But stay strong. We'll get through tonight." They retreated to the bedroom, terrified that the demon might attempt something even worse. But aside from an oppressive feeling and faint scratching on the walls, no further incidents occurred before dawn. Still, by morning, they were both pale and exhausted. It was time to face this evil once and for all. John and Mary drove to Hanover on a cloudy afternoon, with their hearts heavy with a mix of fear and hope. They pulled up to a modest chapel building adjacent to a community center. Waiting outside was Bill Bean. He was a tall, solidly built man in his 40s, with a calm but serious expression. As John stepped out of the car, Bill's eyes locked onto him, and John saw a flash of concern and determination there. Bill greeted them warmly but with gravity. "John, Mary, I'm glad that you came. We have a lot to talk about, and not much time to waste." His voice was steady, with a kind of authority that put John a little more at ease. Inside the chapel, they sat in a small side room with chairs arranged in a circle. A large wooden cross hung on the wall, and the faint scent of incense lingered. John recounted his story to Bill in full detail, this time holding back nothing. As he spoke, Bill listened intently, occasionally nodding, his brow furrowed. Mary chimed in about the recent activity and how it had escalated. When John described the demon and its words, "We are Legion, you belong to us," Bill visibly stiffened. He seemed to recognize the gravity of that claim. "Legion," Bill repeated. "That's a name straight from Scripture. The demons of Gadarenes referred to themselves as Legion, meaning many. It implies a very powerful demonic presence, possibly multiple entities working together." John swallowed hard. Hearing it confirmed by an expert made it even more frightening. "Can you help us?" he asked, in a plea. Bill looked at John with empathy. "I'm going to do everything in my power, with God's help, to free you from this. I've encountered demonic forces before, and I know the toll that they take. But you must be an active participant in your deliverance. I need you to have faith, at least a mustard seed of faith, that this thing can be defeated." John glanced at Mary, who squeezed his hand encouragingly. He thought about all the years of terror, the hopelessness that had engulfed him. But here was someone extending a lifeline. He had to grab it. "I'll try," John said quietly. "I don't want to live in fear anymore, and I need to protect Mary." Bill gave a reassuring nod. "Good," he said. "Now, I can already sense a heavy oppression around you. When you walked up, I felt an intense hatred and hostility in the air. That's the demon. It knows I'm a threat to it. It's likely very angry right now. As if on cue, a light bulb in the ceiling popped, making Mary jump. A flicker of a smile touched Bill's lips. Temper tantrum already, eh? That's all right. It's expected. They prepared for the deliverance session. Bill's approach was not a formal Catholic exorcism per se, but a deliverance prayer, a coordinated series of prayers, scripture readings, and commands in the name of Jesus to expel the demon. He explained briefly that while exorcism is a specific Catholic rite, deliverance is often more conversational and prayer-driven, but has the same goal: to cast out the evil spirit. The power isn't in ritual items or Latin phrases. It's in faith and invoking the authority of Christ, he said. John nodded, though he still felt unsure of his own faith. Bill had John sit in a chair at the center of the room. Mary sat a few feet behind him, observing nervously, but praying silently. Bill fetched a small bottle of holy water, anointing oil, and a Bible. He placed a hand on John's shoulder and asked him to close his eyes and pray along in his heart. The deliverance began calmly. Bill prayed aloud, inviting the presence of God and asking for angelic protection. Then his tone shifted, growing firm and commanding. He began directly addressing any unclean spirits that might be attached to John. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command any demon afflicting this child of God to reveal itself and depart. Bill's voice rang with authority in the small room. John sat tense, with his eyes shut tightly. At first, nothing happened. Bill continued, praying Psalm 23 and Psalm 91, passages about protection. As he spoke, John felt a sudden pang of nausea. A wave of dizziness hit him, and he swayed in his chair. The air in the room grew thick and stifling. Mary gasped softly. She later said she saw a dark mist gathering in the corner behind John's chair. Bill noticed John's discomfort and pressed on more forcefully. I bind and rebuke the spirit of Legion tormenting John Drenner. By the blood of Christ, you have no authority here, and you must leave John now, Bill declared. John's head lolled back. He felt an overwhelming surge of anger welling up, but it wasn't his own emotion. A deep guttural sound rumbled from his chest, a growl that shocked Mary to hear coming from the man that she loved. John's eyes remained shut, but his lips curled into a snarl. A gravelly voice, not entirely his own, spat out,
He's ours. You can't save him.
Mary stifled a cry. It was the demon speaking through John. Bill didn't flinch. You have no claim on him, he responded firmly, holding a Bible up. John has renounced you. He belongs to God, not you. John's body suddenly convulsed, nearly toppling the chair. An unseen force seemed to be struggling within him. Mary rushed to steady John, but Bill motioned for her to stay back as he continued the prayers. By the authority of Jesus Christ, I cast you out. Every last demon, every unclean spirit. Legion, I command you, depart and never return. Bill's voice was like thunder in that room. John let out a cry, a mix of pain and fury. The lights flickered violently. Mary clung to a small cross pendant around her neck, praying desperately, and Bill continued to pray, attempting to cast the demons out. What happened next was something John would later struggle to describe. He felt a pressure rising from deep in his core, as though something were being forcefully drawn out of him. It burned and writhed inside, trying to cling to whatever part of him it held. John felt his mouth open, and an inhuman shriek tore out of it, echoing off the chapel walls. Mary covered her ears, with tears streaming down her face at the sound. Bill stepped forward and placed the Bible on John's chest and his hand on John's forehead. "Holy Spirit, fill this man," he said. "Drive out every last remnant of evil." John's eyes flew open. For a moment, they were completely bloodshot, almost solid red, as if hemorrhaged. Mary would later say that it was the most frightening sight, as if another entity was glaring out through John's eyes. But then, abruptly, John's body went limp. A final, guttural hiss escaped his lips, and a heavy weight seemed to lift from the room. The oppressive atmosphere lightened, and the flickering lights steadied. A profound silence then fell upon the room. After several moments, John slumped forward, sobbing softly. Bill caught him and eased him back into the chair, while Mary rushed to his side. John looked up at her, his eyes back to their normal hazel color, brimming with tears. His eyes, however, were clear and present, no longer looking distant or haunted. "It's gone," he choked out. He was almost afraid to say it, but he felt an immense peace flooding into the space that the demon had occupied in him for so long. For the first time in nearly a decade, his mind was quiet. There were no whispers, no lurking dread in the pit of his stomach. Now just a calm stillness. He gasped as if breathing fully after years of shallow breaths. "It's really gone. I can't feel it anymore." Mary broke into relieved sobs and threw her arms around him. John held her, and both of them cried together. Bill stepped back, quietly thanking God under his breath, looking tired but pleased. The deliverance was successful. The demon legion had been cast out, but Bill wasn't finished guiding them. After John had a moment to recover, he was weak and trembling, as if he had run a marathon. Bill sat with him and Mary to discuss how to stay free of the demonic influence. He explained that John needed to reclaim his life and spirit, to fill the void with positive, faithful things, so that the darkness couldn't sneak back in. Bill spoke with such a gentle earnestness. An exorcism or deliverance is not the end. It's the beginning of a new fight, one to keep yourself fortified. You eliminate fear, you starve the devil out of your life. John nodded, absorbing every word. Bill gave him practical steps. Regular prayer, meditation on good things, keeping blessed items or scripture around, and importantly, not giving into fear or negative emotions that could invite the entity back. Walk in strength and courage, Bill said. If you do that, nothing can stand against you. The moment you allow fear or despair to take hold, you crack open a door for the enemy. Don't let that happen. You have authority over your own life now. John took those words to heart. He promised himself that he would never let that darkness in again. The difference in how he felt was night and day. He hadn't realized how heavy the weight on his soul had been until it was gone. In its absence, he felt light, buoyant, free. Mary too was advised on how to protect herself. though Bill believed the demon had only targeted her to get to John. With John free, Mary should be safe, especially if they kept their home spiritually cleansed and their lives positive. He offered to come bless their house, and a few days later, he did just that, walking through each room with prayers, holy water, and salt, declaring it a place of peace. John attended that house blessing, reciting prayers alongside Bill, feeling stronger in faith than he had in years. The nightmares, scratches, and whispers did not return. For the first time in so long, John slept deeply and soundly through the night, with Mary curled at his side, both of them untroubled by dark dreams. It felt like a miracle. John Drenner Jr.'s life transformed after the deliverance. At age 21, he finally knew the taste of peace. The scars on his body remained, but the wounds in his spirit began to heal. In the wake of his ordeal, John found a renewed sense of purpose. No longer a victim cowering in the dark, he felt empowered by surviving such evil. He made a promise to himself that he would never let fear control him again. In the months and years that followed, John strengthened his faith and took care of his mental and physical health. He quit drinking and pill popping completely. He no longer needed those crutches to face the night. With Bill Bean's mentorship, he even learned how to help others who were suffering. Bill often said John had a knack for discerning demonic presence, likely due to his long trial. And under Bill's guidance, John apprenticed in performing house blessings and offering counsel to the frightened. John's journey was not without lingering shadows, however. Occasionally, in the quiet of the night, he would wake from a mild nightmare or catch a glimpse of a dark shape in his peripheral vision. His heart would stutter with the old fear, but he would take a steady breath and dispel the fear with a prayer or a flick of the light. The shadows would retreat, revealed as only tricks of the mind. Still, John would never forget about the demon's final promise, that it wouldn't stop until he was dead. John understood enough about the paranormal to realize that while the demon had been cast out, such entities lurk, waiting for moments of weakness to try to slither back in. He had to remain vigilant, not just for himself, but for his loved ones. Fortunately, he no longer lived in fear of that possibility. Instead, he lived in preparedness. He fortified his life with positivity, love, and faith. He married Mary not long after, and together they built a family grounded in hope rather than fear. They hung a crucifix in every room of their home, not solely to ward off evil, but as a reminder of the light that saved John from the darkness. News of John's story quietly spread in paranormal circles, and in time, he even agreed to share his experiences publicly, both as a cautionary tale and a testament of overcoming evil. His account was featured on a television series known as A Haunting, which is one of my all-time favorites. And by sharing his story, he felt that he was allowing others to learn of the horrifying ordeal that he had endured, but of the power of deliverance that freed him. Standing in the warm light of a new dawn, John Drenner Jr. reflected on his journey with hard-earned wisdom. Evil is real, but so is courage. Fear is powerful, but so is faith. He learned that even in the darkest night, one must never surrender hope, for the darkness feeds on surrender. And he learned that sometimes the greatest weapon against the devil is simply refusing to be afraid anymore. So if you ever find yourself hunted, oppressed, craved by the dark and the demonic, just remember John's words of wisdom. I had originally come across John's story from his episode on a haunting, probably back in 2014 or 15. I remember it gripping me and reminding me a bit of my own struggles dealing with the paranormal growing up. I also remember coming across Bill Bean from this episode, and he would also tell his own story across various mediums and shows over the years, and his story is certainly intriguing as well. I'm sure I'll cover it at some point. While looking for an update on John, I made the unfortunate discovery that he actually passed away last year in 2024. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I hope that he rests in peace. In the quiet rural town of Lamar, Arkansas, tucked among cotton fields and crumbling barns, stands a white colonial farmhouse that once promised a dream life for the Shea family. Instead, it delivered something else entirely, something cold, intelligent, and malevolent. For months in 2002 to 2003, this unsuspecting home became the stage for one of the most terrifying and well-documented hauntings in modern American history. A descent into chaos, violent manifestations, shadow figures, and so much more. This is the terrifying story of the Shea family haunting, also known as a haunting in Arkansas. And this is not a story you want to listen to alone or in the dark. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary, but what happens when it turns on you? The Ozark River Valley was once considered the gateway to the West. Perhaps more so now, it is a gateway to the great beyond, a place where life and death collide, and sometimes, just maybe, don't always stay separate from one another. In October of 2003, hard-working couple Ben and Jamie Shea searched for a new place to live. Originally from Little Rock, their search takes them to Markham, Arkansas. They're hoping to find a house that they can make a home for themselves, as well as their young children. As the couple drives to look at their next prospect purchase, they are taken back by what they see standing before them. There in front of their eyes lies a historical home. In Jamie's words from later interviews, the house was absolutely beautiful and large. It had old trees all around it, and it was just the picture of the house that I had been wanting all my life. The house the couple is looking at buying is indeed old. Built in the 1700s, it is one of the oldest in the state. Together, Ben and Jamie seem to collectively fall in love with it. They can already imagine raising their 3 children upon its grounds. Ben, who had grown up playing in the woods, truly wanted to share that with his children as well. The house was in the perfect location for the couple, directly in between 2 towns the two separately worked in. If they lived here, their commutes would be significantly reduced, and therefore, they could spend more time together as a family. Deciding to take a closer look, the Shays step inside the home. But as their feet cross the threshold, little do they know that something else is taking a closer look at them as well, perhaps from the protection of the shadows. Regardless, the couple loves what they see. In the words of Jamie Shea in later interviews, I knew as soon as I saw that house that we had to have it. It seemed as if it spoke directly to their souls, almost as if something supernatural was drawing them in. Together, they continued to examine the rest of the home before fully committing to purchasing. But as they ascend the stairs and take a look inside the first room, they perhaps aren't quite as sure as they once were. Inside the bedroom lies something strange. There's a fireplace at its center, and on and within it are all sorts of strange markings and graffiti. A local boy named Clayton, who had passed away in an accident's name, was spray painted across the stone. Pentagrams were carved and painted on it, as well as the names the couple didn't seem to recognize. Names that appeared to be in a language that neither of them knew. But despite being creeped out at first, the two thought that perhaps some teens had broken into the property at some point during its vacancy and committed the defacing. So with that conclusion, they decide that the deal is too good to pass up. They decide to make an offer on the home, and to their surprise, it's accepted almost immediately. The couple are absolutely elated. The deal they got on the home seems to be too good to be true, and perhaps for one reason or another, it truly was. Within several weeks, the Shays, wife Jamie, husband Ben, and 3 young children, 8-month-old Jackson, 5-year-old Bridger, and 11-year-old daughter Tori, move into their colonial home to begin a new chapter in their lives. But little did they know that something else, something much more sinister, may just be beginning. The family quickly settles into a busy routine. They decide to hire an experienced and well-reviewed babysitter to watch Jackson during the day, a woman named Molly. Ben, who works 3rd shift, sleeps throughout the morning, then wakes up to attend class, and then heads to work after. One morning as he sleeps in his bed, shortly after hiring the sitter, he is suddenly woken up by the sound of his baby son screaming through the baby monitor he's placed beside his pillow on his nightstand. As he sleepily calls out to Molly to take care of Jackson, he is met with no response from her. Meanwhile, the screams of the child only continue to grow in intensity. Growing frustrated, Ben sits up to go and see just what exactly was going on. He continues to call out to Molly, but is met with no responses. As the infant screams erupt out of the baby monitor, Ben seeks out Molly within the house, but his calls are only continuing to be in vain. Molly is seemingly not around and is not answering him, yet his son's cries grow ever louder. As he makes his way into the nursery whilst carrying the monitor, the screams suddenly stop as he breaches the room's doorway. Then, a deep chill manifests down his spine. The room itself is empty. The crib is barren. There's not a single soul dwelling within the room. Something was very wrong here. Confused and a bit freaked out, but not one to be the superstitious type, Ben then heads downstairs and continues to call out for Molly to try and get to the bottom of whatever was going on. It's when he gets into the living room that he finds a note on the coffee table. The note reads, "I went shopping and took Jackson with me. We'll be back soon." In later interviews, Ben would say that, "I knew for a fact that I wasn't dreaming. There was a baby crying on that monitor, and yet there was nobody else home. It was a very creepy moment." Unsure of what to make of the whole event, he decides to keep things to himself. Several nights later, as Ben heads to work at the hospital, and a large harvest moon hangs high over the Shea residence, something not of this world seemed to be permeating the air within its walls. Bridger Shea is suddenly woken up out of a sound sleep by a chorus of strange voices emanating from nowhere, yet they seem to be everywhere. A cold gust of wind accompanies them, seemingly also with no origin. The young man is absolutely terrified as things are blown around his room. He gets up and begins running towards his parents' room. Jamie too is suddenly woken up, but by the fear-stricken pleas of her young son. Believing that perhaps he had just had a nightmare, she brings the scared boy into bed with her to console him. Trying to quell his fears, she gets up out of bed and decides to take a look around the house. Her first thought was that perhaps one of the other children had left the television on in the living room, but upon examining it, it was turned off. She listens for any other signs of activity, but doesn't hear anything. Tired, she returns to bed and attempts to get more sleep. The night, however, or what dwelled within it, seemingly had other plans. Tori Shea is woken up by the sound of toys being played with. Confused, she glances around her room as her clock reads 3 a.m. on the nearby nightstand. The sounds seem to be originating from her brother Bridger's room, just across the hallway from hers. Calling out to him, thinking that perhaps he had woken up and was entertaining himself, but at her expense, she tells him that he needs to go back to bed. As she opens the door to the young boy's room, she sees what appears to be practically any and all of his toys on the floor, and all of them are acting on their own accord and operating as if unseen hands are meddling with them. What strikes fear into her heart, however, is that her brother is nowhere to be seen. Stepping back into the hallway, she is met with a rush of cold wind and hears a chorus of voices that she doesn't recognize. It was as if multiple people with differing tonalities were speaking over one another, and the cacophony enveloped the atmosphere around her. Unsure and freaked out to say the least, she decides to run back to her bedroom. Shutting the door behind her, she runs to her bed and quickly hides underneath the covers. It takes her quite some time, but she eventually manages to fall back asleep. The following morning, as the children wait outside to head to school, they begin to talk among each other about the previous night's events. Tori, who perhaps was initially trying to rationalize what she had seen, had thought that Bridger had hid from her when she had come to confront him about playing in the middle of the night. When she asked the young boy why he hid and why he had been awake, he seems confused. He quickly tells her that he had slept with their mom and father and hadn't been in his room at all at that time. Further confused, Tori asks him just why he had gone to sleep in their mother's bed and hadn't stayed in his own. And with this question, the boy goes silent. Upon further prodding, he tells his sister that he had heard lots of scary voices and that it had got windy, so he ran. Being a good older sister, Tori decides not to further add to her brother's fear. She can tell that he genuinely meant what he was saying. She doesn't tell him that she too experienced the very same things he had just described during the night. Later that evening, before heading to work, Ben spends quality time with Bridger. The two lay in the boy's bed as Ben reads his son a children's book to relax him. For now, Ben is stuck working later hours while he earns his degree. He hopes that in due time, once the process is over, that he'll be able to adjust his hours so he can spend more time with his family. As he heads back out into the darkness of night to provide for them, something lurks within the shadows of the Shea household. As the children sleep, Jamie is busy crunching numbers and budgeting. As she clicks away on her calculator and jots down notes in a notebook, her concentration is abruptly broken by the sounds of children giggling. Considering the hour, she knows that her children should not be awake, let alone playing. So, she sets things down and decides to investigate. Glancing towards the stairs from the kitchen where she had been, she continues to hear her children giggle and laugh, and then also begins to hear loud thumping sounds as if they were running up and down the stairs in rapid succession. She calls out to them multiple times, yet is met with no response. Finally, deciding to get up and go scold her children for not only being up past their bedtime, but also for running around the house like gremlins, Jamie heads towards the stairs where the sounds are originating from. However, instead of coming face to face with ornery children, she's instead met with nothing but the now cold, dead silence of the house. The thumping, giggling, and horseplay sounds have seemingly ceased out of nowhere. Finding this unnerving to say the least, Jamie then quietly makes her way upstairs to check on them. She's very surprised, given what she had just heard, to find them all asleep in their beds. With a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach growing, the concerned mother decides to double-check the house for safety. All windows and doors are locked. There are no other souls present within the house. This very creepy happening would be far from the last. In the coming days and headed into the following weekend, Jamie and the children have continued to experience strange activity in the home. Jamie decides that she can no longer keep the details to herself, and although she doesn't want to add anything further to her husband's already full plate at this point, she feels like she must talk to him about what's been taking place. Beginning to share the various occurrences, including one that had taken place that very day. Their babysitter had heard crying on the baby monitor, and upon checking it, there was no child weeping. Ben looks up from his studying and freezes as he hears his wife's words. He then tells her that several weeks ago, he too had heard the cries of a child, and upon checking, discovered that his child and their babysitter weren't even physically in the house. And what puts a chill shivering down his spine is that he had kept the experience a secret from everyone. Almost as soon as the words leave his lips, the sound of banging starts to fill the stillness of the house. Thinking at first that it was their children, but quickly realizing that the sounds were coming from downstairs, Ben springs into action and begins heading towards where the sounds are coming from. The sounds themselves cease upon his approach. Then, to add to his suspicion, he goes and checks on the kids and finds each one sound asleep in their beds. As he descends the stairs and approaches his wife in the living room, he seems visibly stricken and confused. He seems to know that something deep down is wrong with the entire situation, but tries to take a rational approach. He starts trying to explain away the sounds as an old house settling. Whether this was a way to help calm his wife or himself is unclear. It at least works for Ben in the short term. He somewhat convinces himself that it was indeed the house settling and starts to head off for bed. Jamie, however, is feeling very differently about the situation. In later interviews, she would say, "It was at that moment that I truly began to feel like we might be living in a haunted house." The following morning, consumed by a newly found interest to discover just what she and her family might be dealing with, Jamie decides to visit the local library. While browsing the aisles, she accumulates a good amount of books on ghosts and hauntings. As she checks out at the front, the librarian who's assisting her can't help but notice just what she's interested in. She then tells Jamie that she herself grew up in a haunted house when she was younger. Jamie then asks the woman if the home was there in the local area or somewhere else. The woman, whom she had never met before, then tells her that it was indeed in her town. She then tells her the address. Jamie's eyes swell larger than the harvest moon when the words leave the woman's lips. It is the very same address that she and her family now live in. The woman then begins to fill Jamie in on the conclusions that she and her family had come to while living in the residence. They had believed that a young boy had accidentally fallen to his death from the second room in the middle of the upstairs section of the house, the room now that her son Bridger occupies. The drive home for Jamie is surreal. The following morning, as she waits for her husband to get home so she can tell him what she had been told regarding the house and their situation, she begins to worry just how living in such an environment could affect her children. Upon Ben's arrival, she begins to divulge to him just exactly what she had learned. Ben began to believe that perhaps, if this haunting was indeed real, that it would quiet down eventually and wouldn't have a large impact on their lives. As the Christmas season approaches, the paranormal activity within the Shea household seems to dwindle to a drop of its former self. One cold and snowy night, as Jamie researches on the family computer, she suddenly begins to feel as if she's being watched. Out of the glare of her monitor, she sees a dark, shadowy figure linger behind her. Startled, she turns around, almost as quickly as it appeared. it vanished. Mortified, Jamie rushes out of the room and runs to the nearest phone to call Ben. As he picks up on the other line, he is hearing his wife be hysterical. Becoming frustrated because he can't simply leave work on a whim, Ben is saddened about the whole situation. In later interviews, Jamie would say this: "That was the first time I ever truly felt scared or threatened by whatever was in the house. It most certainly did not feel like the energy of a small child." The following day, Jamie would return to the library, seeking the woman that she had spoken to in regards to her current predicament and happening within the house. But as she glances around the library's front desk, she doesn't see her. She asks another librarian just where the woman was. She was then informed that she no longer worked for the library. Digging further as to what happened, Jamie is told that the woman left with no warning and no contact information and no forwarding address. Albeit it could have been a very unfortunate coincidence, the timing of it all just seems to add to the suspicion that something otherworldly was influencing the situation the family now found themselves in. Something dark. Over the next several weeks, the presence within the Shea home has seemingly continued to go dormant, yet the heaviness of its existence continued to plague Jamie. In another interview later on, she would say that, "I really had an eerie, sick feeling in my stomach. I really dreaded going home, and it was starting to not feel like my home anymore." One day, after picking up Tori from a friend's house, as she's driving through a construction zone, Jamie suddenly sees a flash before her eyes. Within the blink of an eye, she hits a pothole and crashes her vehicle. Upon coming to, she begins to panic. She sees that her daughter is pinned face down underneath the minivan. Emergency personnel rush Tori to the hospital after arrival on the scene. She's in critical condition. Ben soon arrives to greet his wife at the hospital, and the two weep and hold each other. The doctors believed that Tori had a broken back, but to what extent was yet to be seen. They were unsure if she would survive, and if she did survive, they weren't sure if she'd ever be able to walk again. In a miraculous turn of events, just 2 weeks after the accident, the hospital releases Tori just in time for Christmas. Although she will be bedridden for several months, she's expected to make a full recovery. Several more weeks pass, and with them the holidays. Jamie, who had taken a leave of absence from work to be able to care for her recovering daughter, barely notices any paranormal activity taking place in the house. As she gets Tori to bed one night, she's called to by her son. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, he tells his mother that people are talking in his room, and it's keeping him from sleeping. Jamie goes to check on baby Jackson. She soon finds him fast asleep in his crib, fortunately unaffected by the sounds or people talking. However, upon exiting his room, she makes her way towards Bridger's. As she gathers some stuffed toys for her son to sleep with that night, she can't shake the eerie feeling as if someone or something is watching her. As she makes her way back into her and Ben's bedroom, she tells Ben that she no longer feels safe within their home. The couple are torn, though, because they know that they can't go anywhere until Tori is fully recovered due to her condition. That, before anything, was their number one priority. They didn't want to have to focus on selling and then buying a home amidst her healing journey. After drifting off to dreamland, as a large amber moon hangs in the sky overhead, something sinister stirred within the walls of the Shea family home. Jamie is woken up to the strange sensation of her hair being pulled and toyed with. At first, thinking it was her husband, she asked him to please knock it off. Her words then wake Ben up, who has no idea what she's talking about. Then, as if invisible hands are grabbing it, she feels her hair being toyed with yet again, but this time, she's staring directly at her husband. She knows for a fact that it's not him. Then, all hell seems to break loose. The entire house begins to shake. Picture frames begin falling off walls. The bed itself rocks back and forth, and the lights flicker as if toggled on and off by unseen forces. Ben then grabs Bridger, and Jamie grabs Jackson, and all together they rush downstairs to be with Tori. The only way the Shays feel safe now is to collectively sleep in one room, and with this realization, Jamie says out loud that they have to find some kind of spiritual help. The family then tries to salvage any rest that's left through the night, despite various bangs and the ominous presence that seemed to bear down upon them all. In the days to come, the family contacts the Central Arkansas Society for Paranormal Research. The group agrees to come to the house as soon as Tori is well enough to be moved. And within the next several weeks, the day finally comes. After getting the children a sitter for the night, the Shays are then greeted by the paranormal team. It takes some time, but they quickly set up their equipment and prepare for the night to come. The group includes a family, Alan Lowe, whose primary goal is gathering physical evidence, alongside his wife Angela and daughter Violet, who are both sensitive to the supernatural. The presence within the home makes almost an immediate impression upon Angela and Violet. In later interviews, Violet would say that, "I felt a heavy and depressing vibe almost immediately." Within the group is another woman by the name of Karen Schillings. Her job is to try and connect the paranormal happenings with historical factors, such as the house's history. Through her research, she's able to determine that the home itself was built in the year 1780 and was once a stagecoach and hotel. It then later became a jail. As part of the group's routine, Angela and Violet begin a walkthrough of the home to see if they can sense any entities that could perhaps be lurking inside. Going room to room, the two sense the same dark and depressive energy. They also start sensing the spirit of a small child who's too scared to approach them. They then also pick up on not one, but many entities. It's as if a sea of spirits surround them, and they are not happy in the slightest. As the two continue to explore, they would pick up on something else. Amidst the sea, they begin to sense a dark and foreboding presence that seemed to permeate the air around them, something that wasn't human and perhaps never was. As Angela would describe in her later interviews, "I hadn't been scared of a spirit since I was a small child, but this one truly scared me." While walking, the two simultaneously see a brief apparition of the creature. Its skin is dry and dead, its eyes hollow and soulless. It's as if it thrived on pain and misery. This thing, whatever it was, had never experienced a singular breath of humanity. As they finish their walkthrough, the mother and daughter then head back down to the base level of the home to tell the Shays what they had discovered and felt. They tell them that they believed a small boy was present within the house, as well as a multitude of other human spirits. They believed that these were the ones frequently speaking and were responsible for keeping their son up late at night. They then informed them of the very dark energy that they had felt and seen. The two were unsure of exactly just what the creature was, but asked for the family's permission to try and attempt to contact it via a Ouija board. The Shays reluctantly agree, and soon the team lays out the board within the dining room of the house. Ben, who is unsure about the Ouija board method, is in control of the planchette alongside Alan. The group then begins to ask questions as they attempt to speak with the negative entity. Upon asking for its name, the planchette begins to move. It then, letter by letter, spells out S-E-T-H. When asked when it was alive, the planchette again letter by letter spells out the word never. The answers seemed to confirm everyone's worst fears. They believed that they had been dealing with a demon. Then, the planchette, without any assistance from Alan or Ben, starts moving erratically across the board, to everyone's shock and horror. It then flies off the board and towards the crew's cameras. Feeling like this was a sign, the group then reviews the footage. And to further horror, everyone sees the grotesque figure on the monitor as it floats eerily down the hallway and then dissipates into nothingness. Asking the Shays just what could have perhaps summoned a demon into their home, they are at first at a loss for words. However, Ben and Jamie quickly remember that when they had first seen the house, there had been strange symbols and pentagrams within its walls. Could this have perhaps been the cause? The group concludes that, even if it was some teens experimenting with the occult, as first thought, that they still could have opened up a gateway or a portal to the other side and allowed this entity to come in and infest. Angela believed that the family was in imminent danger, and if something wasn't done immediately, that this demon could inflict very real harm upon them, as shown with the potential tie to the previous car accident. She then suggests a ritual cleansing of the house. Almost as soon as the words leave her mouth, the planchette begins to violently move in a figure-8 motion, whipping back and forth with rage. Then, in a ritualistic fashion, Angela begins to burn sage within the home, attempting to cleanse it of any and all negative forces. As the smoke and prayers fill the air, the windows open and close by themselves. The lights flicker, and almost everything it seems like within the home begins to move and shake with energy. Violet sees visions of all the souls that appear to be within the house itself, or bound to the land. She now believes that the entity set was perhaps drawn to their energy and has been feeding upon it as a source, as well as the turmoil being caused to the Shay family. Following the saging, the raging atmosphere continues like a storm. Angela and her daughter then make their way outside and begin pouring a ring of blessed salt around the property, creating a barrier to protect the home and all who dwell within it. With the circle connected around the home, almost the minute the granules meet one another, the movement within ceases. In her later interviews, Jamie would say this in regards to this very night. After the cleansing, I felt an immediate change. Instead of feeling a sense of evil, I felt a sense of peace in the air. I felt that the sense of evil had been lifted. Following these night's events, the next several months, life for the Shays returns to normal. Tori makes a full recovery, and the family seems relatively happy, all things considered. That was until one very strange evening. As Ben and Jamie discuss things they needed to take care of, their son Bridger walks into the room. However, something seems very off about the young boy. He's just standing there and staring at them, almost in a trance-like state. He then opens his mouth and begins to speak, but what comes through him is not his own voice. Instead, a dark, raspy, and menacing tone comes through, a half-laughing, half-wicked sound that deeply disturbs his parents. Jamie runs up and gives him a small shake, trying to get her son to come too, and thankfully, he does. However, he doesn't remember wandering into their room at all. Freaking out as anyone would, Jamie then asks her son to stay with his father as she quickly runs to grab baby Jackson. Upon picking him up out of his crib, she begins to hear two very distinct voices floating around her. They seem to be getting louder and louder as she makes her way back towards the bedroom door. Headed out of the room and into the hallway, she then finds a scared-looking Tori standing before her. As she asks her to quickly come with her, Tori points to the end of the hallway behind them. There, mere feet away, it's large and robed, with the same cracked skin and glassy black pits for eyes. Screaming and grabbing her daughter as well, Jamie then runs them all down the stairs and back towards Ben and Bridger. These series of events left the Shays with seemingly no other choice. Out of fear for their lives, they would jump into the family minivan and leave behind what was once their dream home. As a result of this, they would quietly put their home up on the market and move to a nearby apartment. Ben would graduate school in the months to come, and upon the sale of the house, the couple would take the money and move to a brand new town where they started life anew. Before we go, I wanted to share my thoughts on this case and some of the details that I noticed. The whole ordeal, contrary to what most typically occurs, seemed to make the Shays a much stronger family unit instead of tearing them apart, which is always a positive thing to see come out of these hauntings. From what I could find, it seems that the Shays are still thriving, and thank God for that, given all that they've been through. This case strikes me as more genuine compared to many others that I've seen. I've drawn those conclusions not only from the Shays' actions throughout their story, but from listening to interviews years after. They seem like very credible and decent people, to me at least. Did a portal exist within the Shay home? I certainly think that it's possible, considering they found occult-related symbolism and other ritual items within the home before they even officially lived there. It's hard to tell if it was some kids playing around or something more methodical. Regardless, a door could have been opened, inadvertently or otherwise, allowing these entities to come in and wreak havoc upon lives. Upon having the paranormal research group come in and attempt to communicate with the dark entity within the home, it's interesting that the name that came out of the Ouija board session was Seth or Set. Interestingly, those names are the same names for the Egyptian god of chaos. This figure is also known as a trickster figure at times. Could the entity and the god be one and the same? I mean, it's certainly possible, albeit unlikely in my opinion, but I found this element pretty interesting, and I needed to share it with you all. They also mentioned that the planchette on the Ouija board moved in a figure 8 pattern. This is also very interesting because it's also a characteristic of the demon Zozo. I think this is the first case outside of that original story and the first-hand accounts of interactions with said demon that I've heard of this phenomena manifesting. And I do have to say, all seriousness aside, this case is covered on one of my all-time favorite shows, which is called A Haunting. And I went back and rewatched the episode that features the story, which is called Where Evil Lurks. And dude, the acting, the parts that feature the creature's portrayal on the show are absolutely hilarious. Like, what even is that? Like, come on, guys, you could have done better. Albeit, I always enjoy the show and the stories being told. That part was just way too funny for me not to mention. Now, saging is a very ancient and useful practice. I've seen it work with my own eyes in one of the most disturbing and violent hauntings that I've ever experienced. And it literally forced the entity outside, where it then proceeded to bang on the walls and windows, and occasionally the floor and ceiling. It's a whole saga of a story. If you guys aren't familiar with it, maybe I'll go into it more so here another day. But that convinced me that saging can very much work. The particular cleansing ritual that was used in this case combined saging with Christian prayer, which I'm sure could be effective. However, if the portal was left open, which I think it was, the entity just made its way back into the home, and or another or multiple other entities made their way back in, because the Shays continue to be haunted, and it was that ultimately led to them leaving. I also can't judge them for selling the house as it was. They tried to handle things the best way that they knew how, and I hope whoever ended up with it after and up to present day were able to get things more spiritually calmed down, so to speak, and weren't nearly as haunted and plagued as the Shays were. I hope wherever the Shay family is today that they're happy, safe, and thriving. And I always mention this just to be on the safe side. Please respect their privacy and anyone else's privacy of stories that we've covered here. With that being said, unfortunately, sometimes when we think we've found our happily ever after, it ends up being nothing more than a trap, a lurid false sense of security that when our guard is finally down, the monster within the darkness strikes like a viper from the shadows. So be wary and take precautions, and don't let this be you. We all seek a respite from the current, a shelter from the storm. But what happens when that warm place of rest becomes part of the storm itself? Does one get dragged underneath by the raging current? I mentioned in my last video, which was the haunting of the Shay family in Arkansas, that I had personally experienced sage working against a dark entity, and a lot of you asked me to elaborate on what I meant by that. The following story not only goes into detail on that in particular, but everything else that I experienced in what I would consider to be arguably the most haunted place I've ever personally experienced. And in all honesty, I still get chills talking about it even now as I speak these words into my microphone to share with all of you, because this was not an experience I was expecting to have when it happened. Please like, share, and subscribe, and consider checking out my Patreon and merch store links below. Thank you for your time, and now let us begin. December of 2023, I found myself in Appalachia with, at the time, were my two best friends, another couple named Bob and Brittany, and my now ex-girlfriend Megan. I was lucky enough to have been successful during that time and had the means to travel and explore the country a little bit. I had been visiting them at their house in Missouri prior to our trip in Kentucky, and we'd been conducting various paranormal investigations, spirit box sessions, and other occult-related activities before and throughout the time frame in which this particular event takes place. I feel like it's important to mention this because although I don't think it was the main cause of the haunting, it certainly could have been a contributing factor. We had decided to venture from Missouri to Kentucky, not only to continue our investigations, but to explore various caves within the larger Mammoth Cave system that spans all throughout Appalachia. Being one of the oldest places in the world, I feel like it carries its own kind of ancient energy, and this could certainly be why Appalachia, of all places, has such a haunted reputation, and being in a position to be able to step foot within the system itself, among many other activities. I wanted to see it all. Considering it was my first time not only doing longer-term traveling and investigations, but spelunking as well, I was nervous but excited. Prior to our arrival, Bob had booked us an Airbnb located in Nancy, Kentucky. Having had a long drive down from where we were in Missouri, but eager to explore, we had visited a few caves and spots before heading to our main destination cave. Prior to this, we arrived at the Airbnb, which at the time was called Roy's Place, according to the sign out front, to load our things in and get ready for the exploration that evening. The house itself was fairly unassuming. It was a fairly normal-looking house, all things considered. It was located kind of in the middle of nowhere. There was a large swath of land between any of the homes, so albeit people were nearby-ish, they were spaced out pretty far. The house had a wraparound porch and a white shop building that was located next to the driveway of the house in the yard. We first noticed things were slightly strange when, upon following the directions, which said to use the back sliding door to enter the home, that the sliding door, which led to a sunroom of sorts, was unlocked, and so was the door leading from that room into the house, despite there being a keypad with a code, because this isn't normally the case when you check into an Airbnb. You know, typically you would use that code to get in, or there'd be a key stashed somewhere, or the person would meet you there. So at least from my experience, I can't say that that's a normal thing.
Me and Bob, who is ex-military, then swept the house, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. We thought this was odd to say the least, and messaged the owner of the property and asked if this was normal for them. They responded by saying that their mother lived nearby and occasionally cleaned the property prior to arrival, and that she had probably just left things unlocked for us. Thinking that answer was fair enough, we let things be, and little did we know that it was an omen of stranger things to come. We left the property after gearing up for our escapades, and had quite the interesting time to say the least with our adventure that night in the cave. On our way out, we weren't sure how we didn't notice it before, because this information wasn't listed on the Airbnb listing whatsoever, but there was a Civil War memorial located like half a mile from the house, and upon closer inspection, it was not only a memorial, but a mass grave and battlefield. It was dedicated to the Confederate soldiers who had died there, and besides the numerous graves, we noticed that the battlefield itself actually spanned up to and possibly past the property line where we were staying. Being a huge fan of history, I thought this was extremely cool, to be honest. I had never until that point visited any Civil War battlefield or graveyard or memorial or anything, so I was pretty excited to experience that. And it was even more interesting to imagine the battle itself taking place where I was standing at the time and where I'd be laying my head down to rest. We went and explored our caves for hours. We ended up going miles into a particular cave opening, and, well, it was interesting to say the least. After our adventure was said and done, we were pretty exhausted and decided to head back to the house to relax for the rest of the night. Upon arrival, as all four of us got out of the car and headed to the back door to head in, having had secured the house prior to leaving as well, we noticed that yet again, the sliding back door and then the door headed into the house were unlocked. Me and Bob sent the girls back to the car and decided to sweep the house yet again, feeling much more apprehensive this time, because surely this woman's mother had not randomly come back and left things unlocked again. Upon entering the home, we noticed that not only were these doors unlocked, but every window we could see was unlocked and open as well. The doors leading to the rooms were mostly open, and the front door itself was also unlocked. Going room to room following one another and searching for someone or a reason as to why things were the way they were, we began to notice some very bizarre things taking place. Now, me and Bob and all of us really have a good sense of humor, but pranks weren't part of what we did or how we vibed. As we entered the room where Bob and Brittany would be sleeping, which was the master bedroom, which had its own bathroom, we noticed that things were placed in different spots where they had been before versus our first sweep of the house. The mirror in the bathroom, which was a large oval mirror that had been on the wall, was not only off the wall, but it was laying on the floor, and it was facing upright in the opposite corner and to the left of where it should have been. That alone freaked us out because the odds of it falling and not shattering and ending up not only face up, but completely not broken in any fashion, like that threw our minds for a loop in and of itself. Then there were these decorative glass leaves that had been on the dresser, and they were moved into different spots on the dresser itself. And creepily, a statue of Jesus and Mary, which had been on another table, was turned backwards when it had been facing the entrance to the door it had originally been at, which was the position it had originally been in. At a loss for words, we vaguely discussed things and continued to look around the house. Inside the room where me and Megan would be staying laid one of those glass leaves on the pillow side of the bed where I would be sleeping. What made that in particular beyond strange is that door had been closed, and that was one of the only doors that was still closed when we got there and did the sweep the second time around. So that's also an anomaly that I can't truly wrap my head around because the door was closed. I mean, I don't know how else the leaflet would have gotten in there unless someone grabbed it, opened the door, set it down on the pillow, and then closed the door, or it was something else, something I can't explain. Within that same room, and this was the exact thing with a lot of other things in other rooms, the closets were wide open, And all of the everything that was within the closet, all the belongings, such as towels and blankets and extra pillows, etc., were all tossed out onto the floor, as if someone had dragged them out or thrown them out in a fit of rage. This was also the case within the bathroom as well. Being freaked out to say the least, but no strangers to the paranormal, we decided to go and get the girls and explain just what was going on. We hadn't found anyone, but something was just not right about this place. Upon bringing the ladies inside and all sitting in the living room together, we decided to discuss what was happening. We decided collectively to try and do a spirit box session to see that if there was something there, whatever it was, to see if it wanted to communicate. As we gathered the things from our bags to try and initiate the session, walking back into the split level from the kitchen area from the back entryway, we all began to hear a tapping sound. And to explain, where I was standing was within the kitchen area at this time, and I was looking towards everyone who had made their way to the living room. And I kid you not, and this is a promise, on the window above the sink, I saw a pale-looking hand, is the best way I could describe it, and its nails were tapping on the glass. As soon as I could voice what I had just seen, that there was a hand there, everyone rushed over to see what was happening, and with a scream, me, Brittany, and Bob ran outside. We rushed towards that side of the house, and not only was there nothing there, but where the window was at least 15 to 20 feet away from the ground, because there was a descending staircase that went into that basement of the split level of the house, which was not occupied, by the way. We were also supposed to have full access to the basement because I guess there was supposed to be a pool table down there and other activities, but that door in particular was not only locked, but it was chained shut. And the basement door, which I'll get to shortly, which was basically in between where the living room was and the hallway that led to the bedrooms and the bathroom and all of that, was completely locked as well. And it was not only locked at the handle level, but it was deadbolted too. So there's no way that anyone could have been pranking us. It was quite literally a physical impossibility. Albeit at the time, we thought someone had to have been messing with us. I mean, Bob is he's a pretty tall guy. I mean, he's 6'4", 6'5", and he stood where someone would have had to have been to reach up. And unless they were able to maneuver a 20-foot ladder from where that was and be pretty tall themselves, they would not have been able to put their hand up on that window. And by the time we saw the hand to the time we ran outside to see what the hell was going on, if there was someone somehow messing with us, I mean, we would have seen them running off. So after coming to this realization, we started walking back towards the front door, and Brittany saw what she believed was a person at the edge of the driveway next to the trash cans. And barefoot, mind you, it was really cold. I don't remember the exact temperature, but it couldn't have been more than 20 degrees outside. She's out there basically in shorts and a t-shirt and no shoes, and just runs towards this thing with zero hesitation, only for there to be literally nothing there. Again, thinking someone or a group of someones are messing with us, we decided to sweep the property. And with our anxiety high now, we all three saw a tall, shadowy figure standing towards the back end of the shop building that I had previously mentioned was on the property. Me and Brittany then at the same time ran opposite sides around the building, thinking that if someone was there, that we would corner them and catch them. And instead, we just met one another in the middle on the other side. Utterly flabbergasted now, Brittany went back towards the front of the house while Bob swept the backyard. So basically, there was a little garden/backyard area that wasn't very big that was behind where basically that back door into the sunroom and then the back end of the house was. So he was back there, and where that was just a large open field. So if someone had been messing with us and they took off that way, with all that open space on all sides and no hiding spots, there's no foliage or anything, we would have seen them. I was standing towards the back door, facing where the shed was on the wraparound porch, and with no wind, mind you, the wind chime about 10 feet away from me began to jingle. And I don't think I've shared this, but I hate wind chimes. I don't know why. they just creep me out. There's something unnerving about them to me. And when I heard this jingle, I then looked back towards the shed, and I kid you not, I saw the same tall, shadowy figure standing there that all three of us had seen previously. I feel like it was staring into my soul, and it began to glide backwards towards the field until it just dissipated fully into nothingness. At that moment, I knew that without a doubt, whatever this thing was or these things were, that they were paranormal in nature, that something that we couldn't see was messing with us, and I wanted to know why. Heading back into the house, I convened with everyone in the living room, and they began to inform me that things had continued to move on their own accord when we had all been with one another or within view of one another the entire time. Still in semi-denial at this point, we even tried to contact the local police, but there was no one at the office. Like, that's how rural we were, which to me is a wild concept considering I've always had law enforcement available to me if I needed them. With items continuing to move and the mood being overwhelmingly negative and, frankly, pretty terrifying, Brittany ended up initiating a cleansing of the home using sage and sigils. Upon lighting the bundle of herbs, the activity seemed to kick into overdrive. Then, a massive series of bangs came from that locked basement door. Feeling a personal challenge, Brittany then drew a sigil onto the basement door and then onto the front door of the house itself and ordered the entity to leave the home. This whole experience was insane to see happen in real time, to say the least. I mean, this was, and I think aside from maybe one other experience that I'll go into another time as well, which was at the Sally house, has to be the most aggressive haunting I've ever experienced. I mean, the things that were happening and how fast they were happening were mind-boggling. Following this, things seemed to calm down within the house itself, at least where we were at. However, it wasn't the end. Knocks and bangs continued to surround us, but they all came from outside of the house or from that basement door. By this point, it was really late, like probably 3 to 4 a.m. from what I can remember. And what's crazy is that Bob and Brittany, who were well versed in the occult, certainly much more than me and Meg were at the time, decided to do, of all things, go to sleep in the haunted ass house in the back bedroom where the mirror, the glass leaves, and the Jesus and Mary statue kept moving, because of course they would. It actually became an inside joke between us because the Jesus statue in particular kept moving positions throughout the night. I mean, it moved, I want to say like a good 4 or 5 times, several times of which the door had been closed and we had all been together prior to checking. We ended up calling it breakdancing Jesus to make light of it all later. Now, those two go lay down, and I'm like, I cannot wait to get the hell out of here. But also, I was exhausted, and not wanting to lay in the bedroom that was meant for us, I instead decided to go try and doze off in the living room. Meg, who could sleep through a cyclone, was able to fall asleep. But with me, every single time I started to doze off, I got a bang from behind my head on the wall from outside of the house whilst on the couch. I then moved to the floor, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. That thing knocked on the basement ceiling where my head was, and I tried moving it, I want to say at least 2 other times, and it would just follow me. And it seemed like every time I dozed off, it would just mess with me. It would bang on the floor or the wall or wherever and just keep me awake. Once the morning sun pierced the sky and tapped out from lack of sleep and my adrenals running on high all night, needless to say, I was ready to get out of there. I went and woke everyone back up so we could figure out another Airbnb to go to. We had originally decided a 2-night stay at Roy's place, but I decided to say screw it and take the loss on the second night because after messaging the owner and telling them what had happened all night, she completely denied everything and said that we were trying to scam her despite just asking for a refund for the second night, which we absolutely were not staying for. So how that's a scam, I can't do, the math isn't mathing. So with our bags packed, we moved to another Airbnb that I believe was near or in Lexington, Kentucky. And the vibe was entirely not weird at all. And the place, thank God, for the sake of my sleep that day, was not haunted. Now, what's funny is that we had booked the Airbnb through Bob's account on the Airbnb app. And the lady ended up leaving him a terrible review saying that we were crazy and we were trying to pull some kind of a scam, which is hilarious, mind you. But the irony is that despite this, and despite the positive reviews, which I'm honestly convinced are fake at this point, the property itself was delisted as an Airbnb within about a month following our stay. Now, considering how haunted the house was, the owner had to have known, dude. I have no clue how you wouldn't. Also, the Confederate burial ground and the Civil War battleground, none of that was listed as being attractions or anything. And considering it was that close, I mean, up to and possibly past the property line, we thought that was weird too. Now, I have no idea if anything entity-wise had followed us from prior paranormal investigations or spirit box sessions or the caves we had visited or anything previously. I have no idea if the haunting had anything to do with the Civil War battleground or memorial or what have you. Those questions I don't think I'll ever get answers to. But what I do know is that it very much was one of the most, again, if not the most aggressive haunting or manifestation of the paranormal that I've ever seen. It not only was aggressive, but it seemed intelligent and calculated and unyielding. You know, I grew up in 2 haunted houses, which those stories I've shared in their own video, which I'll link below, as well as in my second book, which is Stories from the Archives Volume 2. And with those experiences, albeit there were many terrifying manifestations, they were much more spaced out. I definitely experienced what I would consider long-term hauntings. And this place, aka Roy's place, was something else entirely in a league of its own. And I've experienced a lot of other places since then, and this one still prominently stands out anytime I think of a haunted place. Now, those I've talked to about this story have asked me if I'd ever return, and honestly, if I had the time and resources and ability, albeit it's not an Airbnb anymore, I think I would, despite being so scared the first time. At that point, I hadn't been out in the field very long. I was pretty new to the occult and paranormal investigating and all of the above. Certainly not necessarily the paranormal, but I wasn't nearly as desensitized as I am now. So if I did go back, I definitely think I'd have a better handle on things emotionally and maybe not be as scared. And I'd definitely be anticipating activity. Now, I have reached out to everyone who was involved and asked them to share if they want to. But with it being the holidays and the fact that we all have different schedules and whatnot, it may take a while if anyone does share. And what I'll probably do is gather those testimonies of either Bob, Brittany, or Megan and basically do a follow-up video so they can share their perspectives on what happened. And hopefully I'll be doing that in the near future. So yeah, that was my story to finish up the year. And let me tell you, it's taken quite some time to come to terms with those experiences because they were truly scary. And I do not scare easily. That I can assure you of.
In the lush mountains of Taiwan, beneath the constant veil of mist and rain, a beautiful mansion promised comfort and prestige to an American family starting a new chapter abroad. But behind its glass walls and marble floors, something ancient was waiting. They were not alone. What began as whispers in the night soon grew into footsteps, voices calling from the dark, and finally, violent attacks no skeptic could dismiss. The bishops had unknowingly stepped into a battlefield between the living and the restless dead. Spirits starved of offerings, bound by tragedy, and hungry for the energy of the living. This is their story, true, terrifying, and unforgettable. In the humid nights of Taiwan, when the summer rains swell rivers and mist coils through the valleys, there is a month that no family dares to ignore. Lanterns glow at doorways, incense smolders on sidewalks, and baskets of food are left on stoops, not for the living, but for the dead. This is Ghost Month, the time when the gates of the underworld are said to open, releasing the restless and the hungry into the world of men. In Chinese belief, these are not the honored ancestors who receive reverent offerings at family altars. These are the forgotten dead, the souls of those who perished violently or without descendants to honor them. They wander, gaunt and hollow, tormented by insatiable appetites that rice, wine, and paper money can only briefly ease. They are known as the Uruguay, the hungry ghosts. To neglect them is to invite disaster. Fires start without cause. Illness takes root. Misfortune stalks a household until it buckles under the weight of unseen company. So each August, families appease the hungry dead with careful rituals. The living light the path of the forgotten, hoping that food and flame will buy peace for another year. But what of those places where violence left a scar so deep the earth itself refuses to forget? What of homes raised on soil blackened by tragedy, where spirits were never guided onward, never offered release? It was in such a valley that the Bishop family would come to live. An American father, his wife, and 2 daughters, strangers to Taiwan's ancient customs, arrived with optimism and curiosity. They believed the house they were given was a gift, a token of success. They could not know that it was already claimed by others, souls that had not left, and perhaps would never leave without taking something in return. The bishops would learn, as countless Taiwanese had whispered for centuries, that the hungry dead do not sleep. They linger, waiting for the living to feed them. And in the mountains outside Taipei, in a mansion gleaming with glass and marble, those spirits had waited long enough. The year was 1984, and opportunity had knocked for Dennis Bishop. After years of grinding the corporate ladder, he had finally been promoted to a senior position with his company, a posting that would take him and his family halfway across the world to Taipei, Taiwan. To Dennis, it was a dream. To Candace, his wife, it was a step into the unknown. For their daughters, Stacy, who was 16 at the time, and Marissa, who was just 12, it was an adventure waiting to unfold. The company spared no expense. A driver was provided, as well as housing befitting Dennis's new stature as a CEO. The Bishops, accustomed to modest suburban living in the States, were stunned when they were taken to see the house that would become their home. It sat at the base of the mist-draped Yangming Mountains, massive and imposing, far from the bustle of Taipei's crowded streets. The road curved past rice paddies, scattered cemeteries, and the ruins of farms, until the driver slowed before the gates. Beyond them, the mansion rose like a fortress, its large windows reflecting the gray sky. For Marissa, it was breathtaking, the biggest house I'd ever seen, she whispered, her eyes sparkling with excitement. After years of cramped apartments, here was a palace, complete with a swimming pool shimmering in the humid air. She imagined running through its endless rooms, swimming until dusk, and playing in the gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Stacy, ever the skeptic, wasn't so easily charmed. She looked up at the upper windows, at the way that the mist pooled along the roofline. The house loomed too heavily, she thought, as though the mountain itself pressed down upon it. Something about it unsettled her. And Candace's unease was immediate. As the front door was opened and the family stepped inside, a heaviness settled on her chest. The air felt different, colder, though outside the heat was oppressive. She trailed her fingers along the wall as she moved through the entryway. And that was when it struck. An unseen fist, sudden and violent, slammed into her back. She stumbled forward, catching herself against a column, her breath ragged. Dennis turned around, alarmed. Stacy froze. Marissa giggled nervously, thinking that maybe her mom had tripped. But Candace knew better. She hadn't tripped. Something had shoved her. She turned, eyes wide, but no one stood behind her. The cavernous foyer was empty. Her skin prickled. She forced a smile for her two daughters, not wanting to frighten them. The company representative talked about all of the amenities of the property, about its prestige, and how lucky the Bishops were to have it. But Candace's mind was elsewhere. It kept replaying that moment over and over again. The blow, the cold, the feeling of being watched the instant she crossed the threshold. For 2 weeks, she begged Dennis to reconsider. They toured other homes, and those homes were smaller, more humble, but were tucked in crowded neighborhoods. Nothing seemed to compare to the mansion. Nothing impressed Dennis the way the estate did. He saw in it success, stability, and a future for his family abroad. Candace, however, only saw shadows. In the end, her protests were drowned out by reason and responsibility. With Dennis's career on the line, she relented. They would move into the mansion. She told herself she would find a way to make it work. Yet even as boxes were carried in, even as Marissa danced through the hallways, Candace felt the mansion looming around her. The Bishops believed they were settling into a home, but in truth, they had crossed into a domain that did not belong to them. The first weeks in the mansion were filled with contradictions, opulence and unease, beauty and menace. To Marissa, the place was enchanted. She wandered its halls with awe, exploring room after room as though she had stumbled into a fairy tale palace. She swam in the pool until her fingertips wrinkled, delighted to finally have space to breathe and play. But to Candace, every corner whispered discomfort. The jungle pressed close to the estate. Humidity clung to every surface. Vines crawled along the outer walls. And each night, the air rang with the buzz of cicadas and the calls of unseen creatures. The house seemed less a sanctuary than a fortress, standing against a wilderness that wanted to creep back in. It was during one of those early evenings, while the family unpacked, that the jungle showed its teeth. Stacy's scream rang down the staircase. Dennis and Candace rushed upward, only to freeze at the sight of a giant spider. Its body thick and black. It clung to the wall near Stacy's door. Its long legs twitched as it crept slowly and deliberately. Marissa shrieked and leapt onto a chair. Dennis cursed under his breath, and Candace's skin crawled as her chest tightened. Their driver, Achan, hurried in wielding a shovel. With one brutal strike, he smashed the creature, and its body crumpled to the floor. He stood over the remains, his expression grim. "These spiders," he said softly, "they go in pairs. So if you kill one, the other is always nearby." Candace felt a chill race down her spine. She found herself glancing toward the shadowed corners of the hallway, half expecting to see another set of legs scuttling towards them. That night, she lay awake, imagining the mate spider creeping silently into a bedroom. But pests were not the mansion's only gift. The rains came heavy, as they did in Taiwan's monsoon season. Water streamed down the mountainside and into the house itself. The walls began to drip, and in the bedrooms, streaks of moisture traced downward like tears, soaking carpets. Candace wrapped towels around the bases of the doors to hold the water back, but the mansion seemed determined to drown itself. Then came the electricity. At first, it was little shocks, light switches that snapped with static when touched. Then it grew worse. A flick of a switch sent painful jolts through fingertips, strong enough to leave Candace afraid of the lights themselves. She kept lamps unplugged and would sit with her daughters in the dark. Yet despite this, the power bills rose inexplicably, far beyond what they could explain with normal use. Dennis grew frustrated, convinced the family was careless with the electricity. Candace argued back, furiously. The house was draining them in ways that he couldn't or wouldn't see. And still, stranger things crept in. Late at night, Stacy swore she heard footsteps in her room, soft and deliberate, as though someone circled her bed in the dark. She pulled her covers tighter, her heart pounding, too afraid to cry out. Candace too felt it, the faint whisper of her name in an empty hall, the flicker of a light at the edge of her vision. She told herself it was exhaustion, stress, the strangeness of life abroad. But deep down, she knew she was being watched. The house, it seemed, had opened its eyes. Night fell differently in the mansion. The jungle pressed against the walls, the screaming of cicadas giving way to stillness that made every creak echo louder than it should. It was in this silence that the first true whispers began. Marissa noticed less, at least at first. She still tried to find wonder in the house, though even she began to ask strange questions. One evening, she peered out a window toward the dark yard and asked her sister, "Is Achan here?" referring to their driver. But the yard was empty. There was no footsteps in the gravel, no sign of anyone. Stacy shivered at the question. The mansion was vast, but it never truly felt empty. It was as though the family had become guests in their own home, moving through rooms that belonged to someone or something else. Candace's instincts screamed that something was wrong. She began to listen more carefully at night, to pause when the air shifted as though someone unseen had passed by. She didn't tell Dennis. He was already frustrated with the leaking roof, the electrical shocks, and the constant bills. To him, these were solvable problems. To her, they were symptoms of something far deeper, something alive in the walls. But for the sake of her daughters, she kept her fear tucked away. She smiled when she needed to, laughed when Marissa showed excitement. Yet each time she closed her eyes at night, she felt it, the weight of unseen eyes staring at her from the darkness. And in silence, the house grew bolder. For weeks, Stacy had grown accustomed to hiding her fear. She heard footsteps that had no source, whispers that carried her name through the dark, but she kept it all inside. She told herself that it was stress or imagination, and if she spoke, she feared she'd sound crazy. Her solace was Thomas. 16 like her, he was a local boy with an easy smile. He offered an escape from the mansion's suffocating atmosphere. Whenever she could, she spent evenings at his home, laughing, listening to music, and forgetting the dread that seemed to hang like smoke over her family's new life. It was on one such evening, after Thomas dropped her off at the gate, that the house revealed itself. The night was humid, the jungle thick with the sounds of frogs. Thomas waited at the end of the driveway as Stacy slipped inside. He glanced back at the looming structure, its dark windows glinting faintly under the pale moon, and then he froze. At the top floor, a light flickered to life. Behind the glass, a woman's silhouette stood, her hair long, her figure motionless. She looked out into the night. To Thomas, she looked exactly like Candace Bishop. Alarmed jolted through him. Something about her stillness, the way she stood in the shadow, it was wrong. He started the car, then hesitated. A cold dread whispered through him. What if she's in trouble? After rushing home, he quickly grabbed his family's phone and called Stacy. Stacy answered, surprised. "Stacy," he said quickly, with his voice shaking. "Go check on your mom, please, right now. Just please, I saw her upstairs at the window, and she didn't look right," he said. Stacy's stomach dropped. With her heart pounding, she raced through the mansion's halls, calling out for her mother. Marissa, alarmed, followed, and became frightened as well. Their voices echoed off marble and tile, became increasingly desperate and urgent. Room after room lay empty. No movement, no sign of her. The house seemed to swallow their cries, as though mocking their search. Finally, a door opened, and Candace stepped out of the master bedroom, startled by the commotion. She looked perfectly fine. Stacy stopped dead, her breath catching. Thomas's sighting replayed in her head. Her mother's figure standing upstairs in the window, watching, when she had been here all along. The realization washed over her like ice water. It hadn't been her mother. It had been something else. That night, the fragile silence between mother and daughter cracked. Trembling, Stacy confessed. The footsteps, the voices, the nights she felt something circling her in the dark. Candace's eyes widened, tears forming as she admitted the same, that she too had heard whispers, seen flickers of light, and felt the eyes of something unseen. They sat together in the heavy stillness, clinging to one another, no longer able to deny it. The house was haunted. The night after Thomas's sighting, silence weighed heavy on the house. Candace could feel it in her bones. The walls were watching them. The air was listening. The admission she and Stacy had shared only sharpened the tension. They were no longer keeping secrets. Now they knew they weren't alone. But knowing did not bring peace. It brought fear. Stacy drifted uneasily into sleep, her mind tangled with dread. In her dream, the mansion's corridors stretched endlessly, their walls slick with rainwater. She wandered, crying out for her mother, and the air smelled of smoke. Then she saw her. Candace was standing in the kitchen, her face pale and hollow. In her hands, a butcher's knife gleamed. Her eyes flicked upward, not her usual gentle gaze, but something feral, driven mad by terror. Without warning, Candace raised the blade, and Stacy's heart froze. She tried to scream, but no sound left her mouth. The nightmare shifted in jerks and flashes. Her mother was stalking her through the halls, knife in hand. Her father was crumpled in a corner. Marissa screamed as Candace's shadow loomed. Stacy then woke with a jolt, her body slick with sweat. The image of her mother holding the knife clung in her mind like a stain. She sat up, trembling, realizing that the dream had not been random. It had been a warning, a premonition of what the house could drive them to. While Stacy was tormented by dreams, Candace waged her own battle against the dark. With Dennis away on a business trip, the weight of protection fell solely on her. Every night, she gathered her daughters into the master bedroom. They slept together in one bed. The girls pressed close while Candace kept her eyes open, listening to the house. She had placed a butcher's knife and a baseball bat under the mattress. If the spirits came, if anything tried to touch her children, she would fight. The hours crawled. Shadows stretched and moved across the walls, twisting with each flicker of the storm outside. Sometimes she swore she heard someone standing just outside the door. Other times, Stacy would bolt upright, certain that she had heard the handle rattle. Candace would grip the knife, her pulse hammering, ready to face whatever entered. But nothing came. At least, not yet. Returning from work, Dennis found his wife strung thin, his daughters pale and restless, their eyes rimmed with sleepiness. He listened but struggled to reconcile their terror with his own rationality. "What do I tell my boss?" he snapped. "That we have to leave because the house is haunted?" Candace pleaded for him to understand. Stacy begged him to believe. Even Marissa, usually innocent and carefree, grew quiet and uneasy. The mansion had become a battleground, not just between the bishops and whatever haunted them, but between their instincts and Dennis's disbelief. And in that rift, the house thrived. It seemed to feed on fear and on doubt, on the slow erosion of their strength. For Stacy, the nightmare would not leave her. Each time her mother reached for the knife at night, keeping watch with trembling hands, Stacy saw again the image of blood and madness. The house wasn't only haunting them, it was turning them against themselves. The Bishop family had come to Taiwan full of hope, but now the mansion was unraveling them, thread by thread. The Bishop home had become a pressure cooker of fear. Every shadow seemed heavier, every silence more oppressive. Candace did her best to keep her daughters close, to shield them from what she could no longer deny. But the house was patient. It was waiting for the moment when one of them was most vulnerable. And that moment came for Marissa. It was evening. Rain tapped against the wide windows, and the jungle outside buzzed faintly in the humid dark. Stacy was away with Thomas, and Candace had agreed to accompany Dennis to visit a neighbor's house down the road. It would be just for a little while. Marissa nodded when her mother asked if she'd be all right. But as the front door closed behind them, the mansion seemed to exhale. The vast hall stretched around her, too quiet and too still. She turned on the television to chase away the silence, but the sound only made the emptiness more noticeable. Shadows gathered in the corners of the room, deepening with each passing minute. Then came a sound. A door creaking open somewhere upstairs. Marissa's heart stuttered. She glanced towards the staircase, its banister vanishing into darkness. She called out to her parents, asking if they had forgotten something, her voice trembling. But there was no answer, only the hollow echo of her own words. Then footsteps came, measured and heavy, descending the stairs. The young girl backed away, clutching the edge of the sofa, calling out again to see if it was her parents. The living room door swung open with a sudden force. A cold rush of air swept in, carrying with it the unmistakable presence of someone or something unseen. And then it was upon her. Invisible hands shoved her backwards. She gasped, stumbling to the floor. But it didn't stop there. Something pressed against her chest, heavier, stronger, until she couldn't breathe. Her body convulsed, as if this something was trying to force its way into her. Terror swallowed her. She felt her limbs go weak. Her mind pulled into a darkness that was not her own. Whispers clawed at the edges of her thoughts. Hungry, desperate, and human. For a heartbeat, she wasn't herself. She was them. And then silence. Marissa collapsed onto the floor, trembling, covered in sweat. And the house loomed above her, silent once more, as though satisfied. When Candace and Dennis returned, they found their daughter sprawled on the floor. Candace dropped to her knees, scooping Marissa into her arms, asking, "Baby, what happened? What's wrong?" Marissa's eyes darted around, wild and glassy. Her voice was hoarse. "Someone came in and pushed me." She broke into sobs, clinging to her mother. Dennis's face drained of color. He had doubted, rationalized, resisted in every suggestion that something unnatural plagued their home. But this was different. His daughter's trembling, the sheer panic in her voice, it could not be dismissed. That night, the family huddled together in terror, with every light in the house blazing. Candace sat upright with the knife in her lap, too afraid to close her eyes. Marissa lay against her, shivering, whispering again and again that something had been inside her. By morning, she seemed eerily calm. She insisted that she felt fine, brushing off her mother's worried questions. She said, I don't want to worry or think about it anymore, seeming detached. But Candace knew better. Something had touched her daughter, and this was something that could not be undone. The attack on Marissa left no more room for denial for Dennis. Once the firm skeptic, he could not shake the image of his daughter trembling on the floor, insisting that something had entered her. A foreign entity, something not of this world. Candace's fear had now become his own. The house was not simply strange, it was dangerous. Candace reached out to a friend, Bob Patton, an American journalist in Taipei, with connections deep into Taiwan's spiritual circles. If anyone could point them to help, it was Bob. And he did. He told Candace of a respected Taoist priest, a man experienced in dealing with restless spirits, a man he himself had interviewed years before. When the priest arrived at the bishop home, he carried himself with quiet authority. He was elderly, robed simply, with eyes that seemed to pierce through stone. From the moment he crossed the threshold, his demeanor darkened. He moved slowly through each room, pausing as if listening to something that the others could not hear. Finally, he gathered the family, and his words came measured, deliberate. "This house," he said, through Bob's translation, "has very dangerous feng shui. No Chinese architect would design it this way unless he wished to curse the inhabitants." Dennis frowned. Still unused to the concept, he asked, "What do you mean?" The priest gestured towards the open windows, the dripping walls, the unnatural damp that seemed to ooze from every corner. "The mountain's water and wind bring energy, but this house does not flow with it. It traps it. It feeds yin, the negative energy. It strengthens the dead." Candace shuddered, remembering the priest's choice words. "It's been designed to kill." Then came the most chilling revelation. The priest closed his eyes, breathing deeply. When he spoke again, his voice was heavier. "There are two spirits here, and they're hungry. A man and a woman." Candace gasped. Her mind leapt to the apparition Thomas had seen in the upstairs window. She turned to their driver, who had lived in the valley his entire life. "Do you know what was here before this house was built?" she asked. Achan hesitated, and his face tightened, as though even speaking of it was dangerous. At last he said quietly, "A pig farm. It burned, and the farmer and his wife were trapped. They died in the fire." The words clung heavy in the air. Candace's heart sank. The flickering lights, the voices calling names, the woman at the window, all of it pointed to those lost souls. They had not moved on. They had remained, hungry, angry, seemingly tethered to the land where they had perished. The priest's face was grim. "Hungry ghosts," he said. "They do not have what they need in the afterlife. Food, money, or offerings. So they take energy from the living. They feed off of fear, particularly from your daughter." Marissa's face was pale, with tears brimming in her eyes. The family drew closer together, with fear thick between all of them. The priest rose. He said, "I'll help you, but you must understand. What is bound here is strong. I will need some time to prepare, and even if I succeed, it will not last. And if you remain, they will return." His warning was clear. The house was not a home. It was a trap, built on ashes, feeding the dead. For the bishops, the nightmare had finally been given a name. The night of the ritual arrived heavy with anticipation.
The bishops had spent the day in uneasy silence, waiting. Marissa had been sent to stay with neighbors. The priest would not risk her presence. The hungry ghosts had already singled her out once. If they were provoked again, she might not survive. Inside the mansion, the air felt charged, as though the house itself knew what was coming. The Taoist priest returned at dusk, robed simply, carrying a bundle of tools, incense sticks, joss paper folded into stacks of money, a basket of fruit. He instructed Dennis to open every door and window in the house. The spirits must have a way out, he said. As the last window was unlatched, a strange wind moved through the house. Though the air outside was still, curtains billowed, and Candace clutched Stacy's hand. The priest lit incense, smoke curling upward into thin white trails. He began to chant, his voice low and rhythmic, filling the halls with words the family could not understand, yet they felt their meaning deep in their bones. Almost immediately, the house seemed to react. A pressure settled on the family, heavy and suffocating. Candace later recalled, "It was a force that shook our clothes and our hair. Everything was moving, and it became hard to breathe." Lights flickered violently. Upstairs, a door slammed shut with a deafening crack. The air was alive with unseen motion, as though invisible figures were rushing past, enraged by the intrusion. Despite this, the priest did not falter. He raised his voice, commanding, demanding, calling upon heavenly forces to guide the spirits to peace. Then he turned to Stacy. In his hands was the basket of offerings. Oranges, rice, bundles of paper money, all burning slowly with incense smoke. "You," he said firmly, "you must take this to the back, to the graves." Terror gripped her. Her legs trembled. She didn't want to go. The priest's eyes locked on hers, and he told her, "You must. Be brave. They will follow you, but they must be fed." Her mother's hand squeezed hers. Her father's nod was solemn. With a sob, Stacy lifted the basket. The smoke curled into her face, stinging her eyes. She then stepped into the night. The backyard was darker than she had ever seen it. The trees loomed beyond the walls, and every step felt watched. She carried the basket toward the patch of earth the priest had identified, the place where the farmer and his wife had died. Her arms ached. Her skin prickled as though someone walked just behind her. She fought the urge to run. At the edge of the yard, she set the basket down and whispered through her tears, "Take this, please, and leave us alone." For a moment, the air stilled, and then, as if in answer, the night swallowed the offering. Inside, the priest moved room to room, sprinkling holy water, chanting at each corner, and each time he entered, the lights would die, slowly flickering back on, only as he finished his incantations. Candace and Dennis followed, their hearts pounding. They could feel it, the shift, the weakening of the presence that had plagued them. The chanting rose to a crescendo, smoke thick in the halls, as a final prayer echoed through the house. And then, silence.
The wind ceased. The walls no longer seemed to hum. And for the first time in months, since they had arrived, the house felt still. Before leaving, the priest produced a talisman, a mirror etched with the symbols of the I Ching. He fixed it above the door, firmly patting it into place. "This will keep harmony here," he said, "but only for a short time." His eyes were grave. "The hungry ghosts are appeased, but only for 2, maybe 3 months. And after that, they will return. You must leave this house, or a great tragedy will come." The warning settled deep into their hearts. The house was calm now. The danger, however, was far from gone. The house stood unnaturally quiet in the aftermath of the ritual. For the first time in months, the oppressive weight had lifted. The walls no longer groaned. The air no longer pressed down on their lungs. Candace wept with relief. Dennis, exhausted, finally allowed himself to believe that what had tormented his family was real. He had fought against his beliefs, against fear, clinging to reason and responsibility. But now there was no argument left. He had seen too much. He knew the priest was right. In the days that followed, the mansion remained eerily still. Nights passed without footsteps, without whispers. Stacy slept without hearing her name being called. Candace no longer felt eyes burning into her back. And even Marissa, who had returned from the neighbors, seemed lighter, free of the strange detachment that had followed her from the attack. The Bogway mirror gleamed above the front door, a silent sentinel. The family lived in its shadow, aware that the peace was only borrowed time. Candace began to plan. She marked the months carefully, watching the calendar as though it were a countdown to doom. Stacy would finish her schooling by June, and by then, they would be gone. Dennis made quiet inquiries about transfers, careful not to draw suspicion from his superiors. Every decision was guided by the priest's warning: before the hungry ghosts would return. It was not an easy choice. Dennis's career had brought them here, had promised them prosperity. But what was a promotion compared to the safety of his family? Stacy finished her final term of school that June, and her relief mirrored her mother's. Dennis arranged their departure with quiet urgency. When the time came, the family packed their belongings into crates, and the rooms were emptied, one by one. On their last morning in the house, the air was unnervingly still. The jungle outside shimmered in the heat, and for once, no storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Candace stood at the front door, staring at the Bogway mirror fixed above it. The talisman glinted faintly in the light. For months, it had kept the house calm, but she knew its power would soon wane. As she turned to leave, she glanced up at the second-floor window, the same place Thomas had once seen a figure standing. And for the briefest moment, she thought she saw something. The outline of a woman, her face hidden in the shadows. But a blink later, the window was empty. Candace shivered. She would not look back again. The bishops left Taiwan behind, returning to the United States with more than just suitcases. They carried with them the memory of the mansion, the unseen blows, the whispers from the darkness. In the night, Marissa collapsed on the floor, seemingly invaded by something malicious. In interviews years later, Candace admitted that the experience had shattered the boundaries of her world. I had learned that there are powers that we don't understand, she said. Energies, spirits, things that can touch our lives in ways that you can't imagine unless it happens to you. The family never returned to that valley. They never sought the mansion again. Whether the house still stands, whether others live there unaware, no one can say. But in Taiwan, where the Hungry Ghost Festival still burns bright each summer, the belief endures. The dead remain among us, if not given rest. And in the shadow of the Yangming Mountain, where fire once consumed a farmer and his wife, where a foreign family came seeking a home and only found terror, the hungry ghosts still linger, waiting for the living to feed them. So it took some digging, but I was able to figure out what the bishops are up to these days. I haven't seen or come across any updates on them from other creators, so I decided to try and find out for myself, and to my surprise, I did indeed discover the details. The bishop's case was made famous by the TV show A Haunting, which is one of my all-time favorites. Their episode was amply titled Hungry Ghosts. My version is essentially a retelling of their harrowing case with additional details that I could find. With that being said, what are the bishops up to these days? Well, I'm going to tell you, but I will omit some details as to respect their privacy. It seems like Dennis and Candace are no longer married. I'm not sure what happened to Candace, but I hope wherever she is, that she's doing well. Dennis has since remarried and is a COO of a major global company. Albeit, I'm not sure if it's the same company that he worked for during the family's experiences, but he continues to work abroad in Asia and other parts of the world, and him and his wife seem to have adopted a son. Everyone, from what I can tell, has moved on and returned to a sense of normalcy and seems to be happy and prosperous. I truly hope that is the case, and I don't know about you, but I love a happy ending. With me providing those details, again, please respect the bishop's privacy, and that goes for anyone whose cases I've covered here. Be kind and be respectful, and please don't bother anybody. Thank you guys so much for watching this new episode. I took a bit of a different writing approach with this one, but I hope that you still liked it. And if you did, please leave the episode a like. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and subscribe if you're new here. All those things help me out a ton on the platform. You can also watch all my content ad-free by becoming a channel member by clicking Join Now here on YouTube, or you can become a patron by visiting patreon.com/mysteryarchives. If you'd like to check out my books, which each contain 10 real and haunting paranormal cases, including my own story, please visit mysteryarchives.myshopify.com, or you can buy them on Amazon. Other than that, guys, I truly appreciate you all and your continued support to allow me to do what I do. I, as always, could not be more proud of how amazing this community has become and continues to be. I hope you all are doing well mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I'll see you soon with another brand new episode. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to stay safe out there from hungry ghosts and other specters that may haunt the night. And take care. I'll see you next time.